Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If Guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Issei the Reaper Could Swap Soul. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. So, who is this lost kid? Giulio Gesualdo inquired, his lime green hair and extravagant priestly attire making him stand out like a peacock in a pigeon coop. And standing before him in an awkwardly shifty, uncomfortable manner, yet trying their damnedest to not look as uncomfortable or terrified as they actually were, at least as well as a 7-year-old could manage, was an ordinary-looking boy in an ordinary boyish outfit for a kid with a bandage wrap over his brown hair, a pair of shirt and shorts, red and white. Turn him upside down and he'd be the flag of Poland. Answer him, young man. The boy stiffened as a woman in standard nun outfit spoke at him in a strict tone. To his credit, Grisela Quarta, despite being a teenager, was found to be a menacing teacher according to 9 out of 10 children. The 10th child was suspected to be lying as they were interviewed right as the subject of the questionnaire walked past them, but that would be a story for a different day. The boy, trying to act as though he wasn't terrified out of his wits, glanced around the peculiar place he would soon learn was a cathedral. He felt about as small as a guppy in a sea of strange adults. I can't remember, sir. I think I have amnesia. A Japanese kid with amnesia. Well, that's a first, Giulio muttered, rubbing his smooth chin thoughtfully. How in the heavens did he get here? The boy gulped, his memory a jumbled mess of a plane and then suddenly the sea. I was in a plane, but then I was at the sea, he said, not really sure how things went yet that resulted in him being asked by these weird people, not having the understanding to understand that he was a survivor of an unfortunate air crash. Giulio nodded, already piecing together the story. He noticed Grisela's icy gaze softening slightly as sadness washed over her face. He could tell what she wanted him to do with the boy. Leaning down to the boy's eye level, Giulio said, well then, let's play a game of questions and answers, shall we? Have you heard of it? The boy shook his head, looking uncertain. It's a very simple game. I ask, you answer, truthfully. Then you get to ask, and I answer. Easy, right? The boy nodded hesitantly. All right, to show you the ropes, I'll start first. How old are you? The boy blinked. Perhaps he was estimating a way harder question. 6. Giulio flashed a cheeky grin. You don't sound so sure. You're not lying, aren't you? And no, I'm not. The boy looked indignant. I just don't know the properly answer. Proper. He might be young, but he was rather sound for a kid, Giulio surmised. Okay, that's good enough. Your turn to ask. What question can I ask? Anything. Giulio smiled. All right, my turn. What? You asked a question already, didn't you? That's not. The boy started to protest but then seemed to realize that, yes, he had indeed asked a question earlier. Reluctantly, he accepted the rules of this newly invented game. Fine. Your turn. Giulio's smile grew warmer. It seemed the boy was becoming more comfortable, and his pouty expression was a sure sign that he was just a regular kid at heart. He leaned down closer and whispered conspiratorially, but I'll let you off lightly this time. Go ask again. Anything you want. And don't be shy. You can even ask us funny questions if you like. The kid, still feeling a bit lost in this strange game but eager to participate, furrowed his brows in thought. Then, his face lit up with a mischievous grin that mirrored Giulio's earlier playfulness. Okay, he began, excitement bubbling in his voice. If you were a superhero, what would your superpower be? Giulio burst into laughter, his lime green hair bouncing with his amusement. Well, that's a fantastic question. Grisela, you first. Grisela, who often came across as stern and unyielding, surprised everyone with her response. She leaned in closer, her eyes twinkling with humor. I'd have the power to make children finish their vegetables without any complaints. Issei giggled at the thought of a vegetable-wielding superhero, and Giulio couldn't contain his laughter. That's a noble power, Sister Grisela. As for me, I'd choose the power to always find the TV remote when it's lost in the couch cushions. No more searching for hours. Issei's laughter joined theirs, and for a moment, the strange cathedral didn't seem so intimidating anymore. It was a place filled with unusual people, but they were also people who could appreciate a good laugh. Round 2, my friend, Giulio announced theatrically, pointing at Sister Grisela. But this time, it's all about her secrets, so you've got to cover those ears of yours and not play the nosy eavesdropper, Capus. The boy blinked, his confusion once again palpable. But he was clearly determined to make sense of this absurd game. Right. Giulio forgot that slangs didn't get automatically translated by the bilingual spell. Understand. Okay. The boy obediently clapped his hands over his ears, his eyes fixed on Giulio's lips as if he were deciphering an alien language through expert lip reading. Turning to Grisela, Giulio unleashed his next set of inquiries with a wink. Who's this young man? The sister responded with a hint of sadness in her voice. Hayao Issei. It appears he doesn't remember his real name. Quite an extreme case of amnesia, Giulio pondered. Toward luck for him. Beside him, any other survivors? Grisela shook her head solemnly. 0, she said, and Giulio couldn't help but mutter, well, that's one way to keep the party exclusive. How much does he remember? Giulio continued, his curiosity piqued. Grisela's reply was succinct, nothing. Family, died in the crash. Relatives, Dulio probed further. They're either deceased or don't have the minimum necessities to take him in. He doesn't have a huge family. Dulio's expression momentarily darkened. An orphanage was hardly the ideal place for any child to end up. He knew it, Grisela knew it, and he could sense that the boy knew it too. It seemed like they were both left with no better options. Okay, Dulio nodded, instantly switching to his trademark friendly demeanor whenever he interacted with the children. He gestured for the boy to uncover his ears, and the boy obliged. All right, young man, this one's for you. Do you think Sister Grisela here is scary? Grisela's face transformed from restrained sorrow into thinly veiled irritation in the blink of an eye. And no, the boy stammered, sensing a potential trap. Dulio raised an eyebrow, his playful demeanor intact. Is that really the truth? Remember, one rule for this game, no lying. The boy gulped audibly and paled. Yes, sorta. Brave boy. Dulio couldn't help but admire the boy's bravery, but he also couldn't resist a chuckle at the way Grisela seemed to shoot daggers at him. She probably thought he was using this question to tease her about her reputation as a child scarer. Well, she wouldn't be entirely wrong. He signaled for the boy to take his turn. Why is your hair green? The boy asked straight out. Dulio chuckled heartily. These. He pointed at his vibrant green locks. Blessed by the Lord himself, I suppose. He beamed, clearly enjoying the conversation. Why, do you think it's cool? It's weird, the boy replied honestly. I've never seen people with green hair. That's because you've yet to see many things, young man, Dulio smiled. Stick around me and you'll soon get to see a lot more. Are you the adventurous type? The boy's eyes lit up with excitement, but he quickly remembered it was his turn to ask a question. But it's my turn now, he exclaimed, his confidence growing as he grinned. You asked me if your hair is cool. I did, didn't I? He raised his eyebrows in acknowledgement. Smart lad. You're getting the hang of this game quickly. With a subtle nod to Grisela, he signaled for her to return to her nunly duties, which might involve scolding misbehaving kids. What's your name? I haven't told you. Dulio feigned surprise, shaking his head. How rude of me. It's a me. Dulio. The boy known as Hayao Issei beamed a bright smile. Like Super Mario. Yes, exactly. Except my name's Dulio. Funny, eh? Dulio wondered if the reference would trigger any memories in the boy, but with his memory loss, it was anyone's guess. Now, my turn, Dulio continued. What's your name? I don't remember. The nurses told me my name is Issei. Do you believe them? Dulio inquired. The boy looked unsure. I don't know. So, Dulio declared, leaning in, Issei, who isn't yet sure of his name, Sister Grisela told me you're going to stay here. I'm gonna have to make sure you have what it takes, so you're going to take a difficult version of this game to see if you can handle it. Okay, the boy nodded firmly, thinking he'd been acing the game so far. Bring it on. Ooh-hoa there, I like your spirit, kid, but here goes. Do you have prior experience living with other people? The boy's spirit immediately wilted, because he couldn't understand the words Dulio had just used. Dulio laughed good-naturedly. Haha, my bad. What I meant to say is, have you lived with other people before? The boy scratched his head, looking perplexed. I don't know. I can't remember. Alright, that's perfectly acceptable. Let's mark that as 0 for now, Dulio noted, making mental notes about the boy's fragmented memories. Now, for the second question, would you like to have a lot of friends? The boy's eyes lit up, his face brightening with enthusiasm. Yes, Dulio smiled warmly. That's the spirit. Now, how many friends do you have? The boy started to answer immediately but then seemed to wrestle with his thoughts before finally responding, 0. I guess. Dulio nodded reassuringly. We all start at 0, don't worry about it. Now, for the third question, how many friends would you like to make? The boy's eyes sparkled with hope. A lot more than 0. Great answer. Dulio clapped his hands once in approval. Now, for the second to last question, how many times have you ever washed the dishes, mopped the floor, swept the broom, or tidied your bed? The boy looked downright horrified. C0, sir, and that's perfectly okay. The priest cheered, instantly psyching the boy right up. All that matters in this game is that you answer it honestly, which you did. You're crushing this game so far, kid. The boy couldn't help but smile, his excitement welling up as he pumped his fist in celebration. All right, now, brace yourself for the final question. This one's a toughie, so you'll need to think carefully before you answer, Capus. Okay, the boy nodded earnestly, leaning in. Was that the last question? No, Dulio laughed. This is, would you like a new name? Rasenone. He can't see in black and white. In the annals of nomenclature, young Zero had always believed he could have done better. Regret had a funny way of sneaking up on you, and in his case, it manifested as a name he'd chosen in a moment of childish impulse. Zero. It sounded cool to a 6-year-old, mainly because it had that enigmatic letter Z tucked right in. It was a frequent flyer during his interview rounds, that string of questions he'd faced time and again. But fast forward 4 years, and Zero couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity and irony of his chosen name. He'd lost count of how many times he'd nagged Dulio, wondering why on earth the priest hadn't acted like a responsible adult and guided him toward a more sensible moniker. Alas, he'd stuck with Zero for far too long. Grisela, the strict but well-meaning nun, had eventually intervened and suggested a name change. She had tried to persuade him to consider alternatives shortly after he'd picked Zero. But as any stubborn 6-year-old would, he had clung to the name he believed to be the epitome of coolness. It was only as he grew up and matured that he finally realized the impracticality of his choice, much to Gryselda's satisfaction. His new name wasn't Issei. He had decided, at a young age, to sever all ties to his past life. Whatever existence he'd known as Hayao Issei, he had buried it so deeply that he was well on his way to forgetting it entirely. Sentimentality had no place in his new life. So, what had he chosen? For a 10-year-old boy with an unrelenting obsession for those sleek, red cars that occasionally graced the streets of Rome, the choice was clear: Enzo. Sure, it still had that coveted Z, but the main draw was the shared surname with the founder of the famed Ferrari car manufacturer. Young Enzo believed, quite naively, that having the same last name as Ferrari's creator would surely guarantee him a fancy car for his birthday. The reality check came swiftly on his 11th birthday, a crushing disappointment that served as a harsh reminder that life didn't always adhere to childhood fantasies. It wasn't until his teenage years that the true meaning of his chosen name revealed itself: uncertainty. The irony was not lost on him. Growing up in the orphanage was an adventure, to say the least. It was a place of both challenges and delights, a place where he had to relearn things he had long forgotten. The Italian language, with its myriad of intonations and dialects, was an insurmountable puzzle. Were it not for Gryselda's unwavering guidance, young Enzo might have flunked every language test thrown his way. Language had never been his forte, and he often wondered if it was the primary reason potential adoptive parents had passed him over. But in the end, perhaps it was all for the best. Enzo had grown into a resilient young man, navigating the twists and turns of life with the wisdom of someone who had experienced more than his fair share of ups and downs. Rubbing his head, the now 21-year-old Enzo couldn't help but ponder how he'd gone from being a lost Japanese orphan to embracing the unpaid gig of a supernatural janitor, an exorcist. It was a career path that could rival any quirky career choice you'd find on a late-night infomercial. Perhaps it all started when he made the dubious decision to ask Giulio if he could be his apprentice after learning about the existence of otherworldly beings. Devils, vampires, demons, and werewolves. God hadn't made them, but they were here anyway, probably thinking they were the cool kids on the cosmic block. Indeed, that had to be the turning point. Either that or the moment they discovered his unique talent, which led to his nickname Zero. It was ironic, sure, and it also conveniently matched the level of mystery shrouding his abilities. As Zero, he now found himself on the prowl in the moonlit streets of Tuscany, a realm where the supernatural skulked in the shadows. Tonight, it was a devil in the spotlight, a devil with a taste for numb-napping, following a rather unsettling pattern. Giulio had entrusted him and Gryselda with the mission, with Gryselda playing the role of the reluctant bait. It wouldn't work. It was a bet he'd made with another exorcist, someone who treated wagers involving the unholy like a day at the races. Enzo was convinced that even if Gryselda transformed herself into the most convincing nun this side of Vatican City, her holy power could rival the sun itself, scaring off any devil within a 5-mile radius. He couldn't help but recall how he, too, would break into a cold sweat when Gryselda approached, although that was mainly because she had a knack for speaking with him, usually accompanied by stern words. She had always been tougher on him than the other kids, but now that he was older, he understood why. In his younger years, he was a whirlwind of chaos, causing a ruckus wherever he went. As a teenager, he was a whirlwind of chaos under the mentorship of Giulio Gesualdo, an ace exorcist who played by his own rules, treating the world as his personal playground. Giulio was kind, yes, but far from the poster boy for good behavior that most parents would approve of. While other kids aspired to be like Batman, Enzo had chosen Giulio as his unlikely role model, much to the amusement of anyone familiar with their dynamic. As he smirked, reveling in the parallels between his nighttime escapades and the fictional capers of Batman, Zero gracefully bounded from one rooftop to another, a shadow in the night. Meanwhile, Gryselda prowled the streets below, her destination a secluded, dimly lit alley near a nearby monastery, rumored to be the paranormal hotspot of the city. Zero settled into his makeshift hideout, draped in a rag like an undercover superhero minus the fancy gadgets. He lacked cloaking devices and magic spells to blend seamlessly into the night, but his low-effort disguise had never let him down, especially in the cover of darkness. And so, he waited, motionless, a statue with an itch for action, battling not only the supernatural but also the creeping boredom that toyed with the idea of him introducing his face to the less than friendly embrace of the asphalt below. This mission is whack, Enzo grumbled inwardly, his thoughts betraying his true feelings. No one had told him he couldn't complain about it. Sure, he was an exorcist, but even they had their limits. He could think of 100 other things he'd rather be doing, things that would bring him enjoyment or, better yet, money. After all, thanks and blessings weren't going to fill his stomach or satisfy his earthly desires. As he silently brooded, he couldn't help but wonder what Gryselda was up to. And sure enough, there she was, kneeling over a pile of boxes, still praying at the same darn spot for the last hour. Her unwavering dedication to the act was admirable, if not slightly unsettling. She might have been praying for the well-being of those lost nuns, but Enzo, despite his upbringing in a Catholic environment, had always believed that a pair of hands working could accomplish more than 1,000 hands clasped in prayer. But he supposed there wasn't much else she could do in that moment. Maybe he should start praying too, he mused. not necessarily for those nuns, but for anything to happen, something to break the monotony. He yearned for a divine intervention to put an end to this failed stakeout, so he could finally return home and escape the damp, uncomfortable summer night where it was neither hot nor cold, lurking over a praying nun like a weirdo. Still, he wasn't about to be the one to abort the mission. The last thing he wanted was an hour of ear-chewing from Griselda. After what felt like an eternity, Griselda rose to her feet, straightened her dark attire, adjusted her nun's veil, and turned to exit the alleyway without sparing him a glance. That was the signal. The mission was still a go. Begrudgingly, Enzo reconsidered his earlier thoughts of leaping off the ledge. At worst, he'd break a bone or two, but on the flip side, that might secure him a month or two of avoiding the usual exorcism labor. However, just as they were moving to another dark alleyway, the roof beneath him shook and gave way as the monastery exploded in a blaze of fiery chaos. Badia Fiorentina burned all too well despite being mostly built of bricks. Summer had no intention of easing the situation either. Lint called it a hot bastard of a summer. The heavens seemed too stingy to bestow even a drop of rain, and she wasn't wrong. Dust and smoke swiftly spiraled into the night sky as the flames danced, hungrily consuming the bell tower. The silence of the night dissolved into a crescendo of chaos as citizens spilled out of their homes, a diverse mix of reactions. Some fled, their panicked screams cutting through the air, while others drew closer, smartphones held high to capture footage of the blazing spectacle, their own screams echoing as they documented the inferno. Zero gracefully descended from the collapsing building, executing a well-practiced roll to break his fall before darting toward Griselda. The explosion had been close, and its shockwave had knocked her off her feet. He didn't intend to extend a helping hand, she wouldn't need it, and he wouldn't offer it. Instead, he sprinted toward her because a more pressing matter had hijacked their original mission. Griselda wasted no time recovering. With an efficient motion, she tore away the lower part of her nun's habit with a single, powerful swipe of her bare hand. "I forgot you have legs underneath all that." Zero's attempt to amend his statement fell flat, and her silent glare spoke volumes. Clearly, she was not in the mood for commentary. As they raced together toward the burning monastery, they both noticed something awry. The bluish-green hue of the roaring flames was anything but natural. Reaching a clearing, they found a massive crowd had already gathered at a safe distance from the conflagration, their expressions a mixture of dread and horror. Sirens wailed in the background as fire trucks and ambulances rushed to the scene, adding to the cacophony. "What's the plan?" Zero pulled his mask up to cover his mouth. His dark attire wasn't entirely out of place, but his unmistakable Japanese features would make him stand out in the crowd. "The obvious. We help." Zero inwardly cringed at hearing that word. He couldn't help but wish people were more self-sufficient, but reality rarely met his expectations. He was no exception to this dependency, of course, but that didn't mean he couldn't loathe it. "Give me cover." With a nod, he retrieved a small, circular item from his belt and hurled it to the ground. A smokescreen erupted, shrouding them in its murky embrace. "Keep an eye on anyone who makes it out of here. The devil might have a hand in this." "We'll meet up in the alleyway," Griselda ordered, casting a series of spells on herself, including ones that boosted her resistance to fire. With swift determination, she plunged into the 3-story building, using the smokescreen as her cover. Zero emitted a gruff snort as he emerged from the dissipating smoke. He wasn't the least bit concerned about her safety, but it grated on him that he couldn't accompany her into the inferno, lest he roast himself alive or choke on the acrid smoke. It would be a pleasant surprise if she could bestow her protective spells upon him, but he knew well that he lacked the knack for magic. However, if there was one skill he had mastered, it was scaling walls. Pure agility, strength, and a pinch of luck. Within mere seconds, he had ascended the nearby building that was slightly damaged from the explosion. Waiting provided him with ample time, perhaps too much, as he scrutinized the unfolding situation. Who could be responsible for this? His mind immediately jumped to a certain terrorist organization, the Chaos Brigade or whatever they called themselves. They had been the primary culprits behind the nun-uppings. But it wouldn't be outlandish for a single rogue devil to orchestrate such a heinous act, rather than an organized group. Regardless, orchestrating an explosion of a monastery in a densely populated region of Italy, the heartland of Catholicism, was a chilling display of audacity. They were calculated, they were stealthy, and, most despicably, they had no qualms about targeting innocent children. Utterly irredeemable scum. As the crowd outside continued to swell, and more law enforcement personnel arrived to maintain order, Zero patrolled the perimeter of the conflagration. He moved from rooftop to rooftop with the ease of a seasoned acrobat, utilizing his tools when necessary and employing the environment to hasten his journey. While he might not have excelled in academics, none could outpace him when it came to rooftop traversing. Despite the searing heat, there were few experiences in life that matched the simple pleasure of the night breeze against his skin. Well, maybe spotting a solitary devil in the act came close. "Why, hello there," he hummed, a grin forming as he detected the telltale demonic essence radiating from the cloaked devil. Or, as the clergy would describe them, vile spawn of hell. In fairness, the ones he'd dealt with had all been particularly unpleasant. 2 satiny ebony wings suddenly unfurled from the devil's back, propelling her into the air. Zero didn't hesitate. He leaped off the rooftop and landed squarely on their back, catching them, her, as the startled feminine shriek suggested, by surprise. As they plummeted toward the ground, he deftly hurled and embedded a light-infused dagger through her shoulder. She cried out, pain exploding through her as her shoulder took the brunt of the impact. The agony had barely registered before a light blade dagger plunged into the ground right in front of her eye. Get off me. Ugh, she sputtered, struggling beneath his weight. Zero removed his glove, ensuring it remained untainted by what he considered vile blood, and pressed his thumb into her wound, eliciting an agonized scream from her throat. When he withdrew his thumb, she slumped, her breathing labored, appearing worse for wear. She must have been caught in the explosion, he surmised. Ever heard of a game called Questions and Answers? Zero asked, his tone deceptively casual. It's quite simple. I suggest you participate, as my partner isn't as chatty as I am, and she'll be rather annoyed if you turn out to be the one behind the monastery explosion. That wasn't my doing, she panted, turning her head to glance at her captor. However, all she could discern was a hooded figure with a partially obscured face and the lapel of a dark outfit. Let me go. I had nothing to do with this. You won't regret it. Yeah, well, you're a devil, so that's a hard pass, he responded offhandedly, still straddling her back with his legs. While any devil could have easily overpowered him or at least put up a struggle, this one seemed oddly complacent, choosing to lie there. Then perish, she hissed, summoning a violent mass of black demonic energy from the air in front of him. It surged toward his face, shrouding everything in darkness for a moment, until the malevolent energy dissipated upon contact with his nose. Nice try, Gatina. Her eyes widened as she realized the identity of her captor. You're the Reaper. Reaper? Oh, right, that's me, he chuckled ominously, while the female devil remained utterly bewildered. If I'm not mistaken, that was the power of destruction you blasted at me. Which means, with a swift movement, he pulled down her hood, revealing her pretty face and lustrous crimson hair, Gremory's hair. Signorina Gremory, fancy beating you here. Her voice strained by pain, she retorted, wait, I can explain. The Abbey, it wasn't me. Not so confident now that your bag of tricks failed, huh? Zero quipped, a hint of amusement in his voice. Why, you've got it all wrong. I was hoping it would get you off of me. Each word seemed to cost her, and crimson splotches of blood marked her presence on the cobblestone street. Please, I had no hand in this. Believe me. Zero's eyebrow arched skeptically. The classic I tried to decapitate you to get some space move. I told you. She found a hint of defiance within her, a glimmer of spirit despite her injuries. It was more of an incentive for you to move. NRGH, I'm wounded. Zero stated the obvious with a deadpan expression. Well, I did stab you. Her cough subsided, and she paled further. Against his better judgment, he began to entertain the possibility that she might be telling the truth. The Gremory family's name was not commonly associated with terrorism in these parts. They were well known around the Vatican and its communities and institutions, but because of the rumors that they were hunted by other devils. Those were merely unconfirmed rumors, however, and he'd be an idiot to unrestrain her. Please, she pleaded, this time more desperate. I can't die yet. He grunted as an internal struggle played out, but eventually he stood up and roughly grasped her arms. She whimpered, her strength failing her as he forced her onto her feet, preventing her from collapsing completely. Heaved to her feet, she swayed unsteadily, supported only by Zero's iron grip. His gaze flicked to the telltale crimson stains on her once pristine white shirt. You're bleeding. Got into a scrap, did you? More or less, she whispered, her smirk growing despite the pain, as if irked by his skepticism. I don't appear capable of walking on my own. I can drag you around like a sack of bricks. Her face paled further at the mental image. Please don't. I'd rather not endure that level of humiliation. Still had some strength left to joke around her captor. He couldn't lie, this captive of his was quite endearing. Captivating looks as well. A shame she was a devil. This is going to be pointless if you die on the road. I won't, she persisted. I'll manage. I just need a quick rest. Fancy a rose-scented bath while you're at it. She managed a weak chuckle. That would be quite the treat. All right, bad or not, this devil was at least all right in his book as an individual. For years, he had secretly hoped to encounter a devil who could defy the teachings he had received, someone who could prove that not all devils were hellbent on humanity's destruction. After all, humans seemed perfectly adept at ruining themselves without any supernatural assistance. However, he couldn't ignore the task at hand. His partner, Griselda, would be joining them soon, and she had the means to extract the truth from the devil. Until then, Zero would keep a watchful eye on their captive. He knew that Ria's Gremory must be the youngest in her family, as it hadn't taken much effort to debilitate her magical capabilities. This might hurt a bit. With a hint of warning, he retrieved another tool from his belt and fired a grappling hook from a hand crossbow. In an instant, they were lifted off the ground, soaring up to the rooftop. Ria's Gremory would have likely screamed if not for her injuries, but in that moment, she wanted to. Break. You sound young, Riaz observed, her voice tinged with curiosity. I am young, Zero affirmed matter-of-factly. I'm surprised someone as young as you would bear the ominous title of the Reaper. No response whatsoever. It seemed his pride wasn't easily stroked. Who came up with that name anyway? And why? Riaz smiled weakly, despite the pain coursing through her. Do you hate it? No, I just don't see the correlation. Rumors tend to spread like wildfire. NRGH, Riaz winced as pain shot through her, momentarily interrupting her thought. The alcohol-soaked bandages stung as they made contact with her wound, causing her to grip the nearby hand towel and bite down hard to suppress her screaming. It had been forever since Ria's last received non-magical treatment. The fiery pain kept her from breathing normally, and her crimson locks clung to her sweat-slicked face. She'd never felt this weak before, and while it served as a reminder to be more cautious, it was undeniably frustrating. "I'd say sorry for stabbing you," Zero began as he deftly wrapped a bandage around her shoulder, eliciting a meek whimper out of her. He continued, "But that'd be lying. Circumstances called for it, and I do not regret the actions I've taken." Rias nodded in understanding, her voice weak but sincere. "I appreciate your honesty, even if it comes in the form of a blade." Zero chuckled softly, a touch of dark humor in his tone. "First time anyone thanked me for stabbing them." "For treating me," she corrected herself, wincing slightly as she moved her head too quickly to retort. Zero's laughter lingered in the air like a ghost, a rare glimpse of humanity in the darkness of their situation. It wasn't unusual for him to maintain a sardonic sense of humor, even when dealing with prisoners. Finding humor in the bleakest of moments was his way of coping with the harsh realities of his life. Like to see them go out with a smile. Too much misery in this world and not enough joy to go around. At that moment, Rias found herself half naked, her shirt removed to facilitate the bandaging of her shoulder wound. Dressing herself was a painful ordeal with limited mobility in her right arm. "A little help. Or do you prefer to debase your captives like this?" Rias requested, her tone a blend of vulnerability and jest. "Much as I want that, it does conflict with a few morals I have left, so no," Zero replied with a hint of gallantry, proceeding to assist her with dressing without making a fuss. "For an agent of the Catholic faith, I'm surprised to meet one that can keep their composure around a half-naked lady." "Oh, you've no idea how bad it is for me," Enzo muttered, and Rias shuddered at the implications. "I'm joking, sorry. That was a horrible joke. Got possessed by Freed for a bit there. Not your first time seeing a lady's skin, I assume." Enzo's response was delivered with a dry wit. "Nope," he replied, his gaze playfully focused on her attire. "Nice bra. Purple. I like purple. Very daring." Rias finally smirked at his audacity. "You're rather openly sinful for an exorcist. Murder is a sin, but I received blessings for doing it," he pointed out. "Did they bless you for debauchery as well?" "No," Enzo chuckled again, his irreverence clear in his response. "They're not all saints either, and they make excuses all the time. So why can't I cut myself some slack when I'm with women?" They didn't seem to mind. Rias raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "You don't sound like your average exorcist. Most of them are deeply entrenched in their faith and beliefs." Enzo shrugged, a hint of weariness in his eyes. "I've seen enough of the world to realize that blind faith isn't always a virtue. It can be a tool for manipulation. So, I keep my distance from that aspect of the church." Rias nodded thoughtfully. "That's surprisingly pragmatic of you. They tolerate me as I tolerate them. They don't get to decide my morals when theirs aren't spick and span either. And using religion as a tool to control the masses. Yeah, that ain't my style. And yet you turn a blind eye. It's my home, and I got paid for it," Zero replied, his voice carrying a hint of resignation. "Those that cling to old traditions are often terrified with the very idea of change itself," he quoted Dulio word for word, recalling a confrontation where he had challenged the Vatican about hiding child molestation cases. "And those in positions of power, well, preventing change is what they want in the first place." Rias studied him, sensing an undercurrent of discontent beneath his casual demeanor. "And so you accept to live in a world like that?" "Tolerate it," he corrected, his voice taking on a growl that hinted at his inner turmoil. Begrudgingly, the intensity in his last word intrigued Rias. It seemed like he could be a potential ally in her endeavors. She realized that to navigate this dangerous situation, she needed to gain his trust. "So," he went on, taking a seat at a stack of cement bags nearby. "You said you wanted to stop this. That means you know about this plan, huh?" Rias nodded, her expression a flat blend of frustration. "Yes, I do. If I had arrived here sooner, perhaps it might have been possible to prevent it, but..." She sighed, her voice trailing off. "It's not exactly a walk in the park to sneak into their operations." "Well, that's kind of the whole point of having patrols," he quipped. Despite the grim circumstances, Rias couldn't help but appreciate his easygoing nature. She silently thanked her lucky stars that it was Zero who had discovered her and not Griselda. Were she to meet Griselda, she might have been deader than dead, or wishing she was dead. "And yet your building burns," Rias bit back. Her remark seemed to have struck a chord with Zero, eliciting a flicker of concern in his eyes. It wasn't a full-blown offense, but it hinted at something deeper. "Indeed it does," Zero grumbled, his gaze shifting toward the still-burning building, which was now surrounded by fire trucks struggling to douse the unnatural flames. "What did your associates do this time, eh?" Rias clenched her jaw, her frustration evident. "They are not my associates," she snapped back. "Do you consider extremists your own as well, simply because they are human?" That pushed a button. Either she was a great actress or she simply hated those that weren't her people. "Fair point, I concede. Tell me who they are then." "Seems to be a common enemy. Howe's brigade," she replied, getting a little bit hazier as the flames began to blur. Clutching her head, she continued quieter than before. "You ought to hear about them. I've heard of them plenty all right. Got any proof that it's them?" Rias hesitated for a moment, her barrel-hued eyes locked onto Zero's. You won't believe me. Try me. Silence hung between them for a moment as Rias weighed her options. Her gaze remained fixed on Zero, who was mostly obscured by his hood and cloth mask, revealing only his russet brown eyes and a hint of his brown bangs. Zero leaned back, a slight shrug beneath his cloak. Gut feeling, I guess, he replied, his tone nonchalant. Or maybe it's because you're my prisoner, and I figure you'll tell me anything you think I'd want to hear. Or, maybe because you're cute. It drew a giggle out of her, though it halted as it was painful for her to even laugh. The charmer, aren't you? How many times have you said that line to the other devils? Zero's casual demeanor returned, and he leaned back comfortably, his cloak draping around him. Not plenty, he admitted. The ones I tend to face aren't much for conversation. The last one I hunted down was a four-legged abomination with lasers firing out of her nipples. Now, I'm all for variety, but a mammoth. That's a bit too much. You're giving me a lot of information for an enemy, Rias giggled. Is that really wise? So you're an enemy. Rias felt her hackles raised and her stomach flipped. If not from the sudden drop of his happy-go-lucky tune, it was from the way he was staring at her. His eyes were smiling, and she could see the thin smirk forming under his mask, but it was the uncanniness of his change of demeanor that raised all alarms in her psyche. This man had slain enough devils to gain him their reputation. Plenty of them qualified as high class if not for their caste. There was a reason this man in black and red outfit and the unmistakable crimson cross of the Templar order was rightly dreaded. His friendliness hid a viper that could struck her down at any time. She realized the blunder she had made and hoped her realization didn't come late. And no, she stammered once she had collected her scattered thoughts. He was not the type of person she should antagonize or be defiant towards. She sensed he wouldn't be as friendly once she crossed a certain line he set. No, I'm not, Zero hummed, studying her closely. Satisfied that his attempt at imitating Greisla's intimidation tactics had worked as intended, he returned to his casual tone. You've been very lucky today, he remarked. Don't push it. You won't know when your luck will run out until it does. Right back at you, she wanted to say, but locked it shut inside the closet of her mind for now. So far, Zero had displayed just the right mix of characteristics, making it hard to predict his next move. He was charming, friendly, and even a bit awkward. But underneath that exterior lay a formidable individual who should not be underestimated. But wouldn't he make just the right ally? Respected by his peers, tolerated by his superiors, feared by his enemies. Someone who saw the world in gray instead of the absolute white and black as most of them tended to do. If she could convince him, if she could bring the right argument, she might be able to sway his mind, or at least rock his faith with the church. As they sat there in an uneasy silence, Rias couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would not be their last. Whether as her jailer or as part of her tribunal, their paths would likely cross again. She needed to make sure he would come to see her, and that meant planting the right seeds of persuasion. No harm in trying. Yeah, sup. Have you heard about the Holy Sword Project? He let her go. Rias was anything but certain she could get far in her current state. The encounters with the Chaos Brigade had left her utterly drained, and her wounds throbbed with an unholy intensity. The headache that pounded in her temples seemed to conspire against any chance of escaping. Yet, against her expectations, he let her go, and that simple act was the crux of their meeting. It gradually became apparent to her, as she explained the whole deal with the project, that the Reaper harbored his own doubts about the church and its dark practices. It was as if, by some twist of fate or a stroke of luck, her story had fueled his suspicions, igniting a fire within him that promptly redirected his focus from her. While not a word was spoken beyond a plain all right, his actions revealed his intent. Without another glance or farewell, he gracefully leaped off the rooftop. Yet, it wasn't silence that hung in the air, it was the palpable intensity of his rage. A simmering fury was etched in the lines of his concealed face. He had been deceived, misled into believing he was serving the light while discovering that both sides were equally tainted with deceit. His allegiance had been misplaced, this he knew, but this sort of betrayal kindled a fire within him, urging him to take action. Rias, weakened and struggling to remain alert despite her body's insistent plea for rest, pressed on. Dark spots danced at the periphery of her vision, and the ground beneath her feet seemed uncertain. As she trudged past an unfamiliar bridge with a name she couldn't fathom, she continued her slow journey. It led her through the quiet, stone-brick streets, past the closed storefronts, until she finally reached a sizable park. It appeared to be her refuge for the night. Or, maybe, even her last. Zero's patience wore thin with every passing second. Waiting for Greisla felt like trying to count raindrops during a monsoon, a futile exercise in frustration. The designated meeting point, his initial choice for this waiting game, transformed into a stage for the monastery's blazing spectacle. Impatience spurred him to embark on a rooftop escapade worthy of a daredevil. Startling a few felines along the way, one could only hope that their feline gossip wouldn't reach the paparazzi of the alley cats. He sought refuge in the high ground. The searing heat from the inferno pervaded every fiber of his being. His gaze remained fixed on the futile battle below, where fire trucks valiantly sprayed water at the unnatural flames, achieving little more than a futile drenching. It was like trying to put out a bonfire with a teacup, a spectacle destined to burn for days but, mercifully, not spread beyond its fiery nest. Searching for a less crowded vantage point, he ventured to the rear of the monastery. Here, he stumbled upon a climbable section devoid of prying eyes, its walls tinged with bluish-green flames that seemed to taunt his boots. Ascending urgently, he clung to the bricks and sills that lined his path, each purchase a crucial foothold. But just as he seemed poised to conquer this fiery ascent, a treacherous sill gave way, breaking the harmony of his ascent. More vexed than alarmed, Zero propelled himself off the wall, performing a mid-air acrobatic maneuver that ended with an unsavory collision against another surface. Grunting as his back acquainted itself with the wall's unforgiving cobbly texture, he decided to abandon the notion of climbing. The flames would make short work of ropes or grappling hooks, rendering such tools entirely redundant. Now employing his wits rather than his athleticism, Zero resolved to locate an entrance. Serendipitously, he discovered a latch, an unexpectedly fortunate find, considering he was mere inches away from plummeting to the ground. Lockpicking tools in hand, he meticulously worked on the lock, an art form mastered through countless hours of practice. Lockpicking proved child's play when you possess the right tools. With a casual flick of his wrist, he discarded the conquered lock and raised the wooden latch. He cautiously descended the rickety stairs it concealed. Grappling for his handheld night vision device, Zero dared to infiltrate the heart of the blazing building. Oddly, there was no smoke, a blessing he begrudgingly accepted. While magic held no power over him, he had no desire to subject his lungs to the ravages of carbon dioxide. Surveying his surroundings, he determined that this room housed the sacramental wine and the insipid, paper-like communion wafers. Sacks of flour, potatoes, and an assortment of vegetables disclosed its dual role as a pantry. The absence of smoke signaled that this room maintained a tenuous separation from the upper floors. Zero muttered curses under his breath, but it was during one such grumble that he made a discovery entirely unexpected for a cellar, a latch. Regrettably, no audience was present to appreciate the sheer absurdity of him literally stumbling upon the latch's knob. This time, the latch was like a hidden treasure in a maze of locks, raising Zero's suspicions and reminding him that he was supposed to be fuming. If the devil turned out to be a trickster, he was prepared to chase her to the ends of the earth, but her demeanor and the lack of any telltale signs of deceit made her look as trustworthy as a toddler holding a melting ice cream cone. However, if she did prove to be a deceitful wench, his resolve was clear: he'd embark on a relentless pursuit, even if it took him farther than the farthest Starbucks. He highly doubted she'd make it that far, given her injuries. At worst, he'd have to look a bit out of this city. But for the moment, she wasn't the star of this show. 5 discarded locks bore witness to his expertise, each scattered carelessly. Zero descended further into the cellar within a cellar, his leap calculated to ensure the ground's welcome. The ladder awaited him, promising an eventual ascent back to the upper cellar. With a drop of at least 20 meters, the increasing warmth of the flames served as a reminder of nature's fury. Flinging the wooden door open with all the suspense of a cheesy movie, Zero ventured into a narrow corridor, so cramped it could barely accommodate a trio of beefy Americans, certainly not a standard Italian trattoria clientele. Eerie light bathed one end of the corridor, casting long, unsettling shadows, while the other end terminated at a brick wall, a resolute dead end. Above the crackle of flames, blood-curdling screams of children pierced the air, a sinister symphony orchestrated in hellish tones. I hate this, Zero decided in no uncertain terms. He loathed this very moment and this very place, feeling as though he had unwittingly stepped onto the set of a horror film. What sort of unholy secret lay concealed beneath a place of worship, akin to a twisted secret handshake at a country club? With a sense of foreboding, Zero navigated the dank and oppressive space, carefully stowing his handheld night vision gear back into his tool belt. He moved stealthily, born a sheer habit from sneaking around the monastery to avoid the sermons, making his way toward the corridor from which the eerie light spilled. The mounting heat prickled at his senses. Peering cautiously around a corner, he beheld the sight of Griselda standing in the heart of the burning dungeon, her expression vacant. Inert bodies sprawled around her like discarded puppets, priests, exorcists, and cloaked figures of mysterious origin, all dispatched like week-old leftovers. Zero's educated guess suggested that the cloaked figures might have been mages, yet their credentials paled beside the grotesque spectacle of charred or sizzling children, locked away in groups of 3 within the cells lining the walls. A surge of emotions overwhelmed him, surprising Zero. Relief, of all things, washed over him. He knew he wasn't a saint, but finding himself relieved that Griselda seemed as clueless as he was in this abhorrent experiment struck him as paradoxical as a clown at a funeral. Yes, there was anger, certainly, but Zero couldn't deny that he cared enough about these innocent children to embark on a holy crusade against the corrupt church and their web of deceit. Or perhaps it was because he had long harbored suspicions. His faith in the church had wavered for some time due to the secrets he bore witness to. He had chosen to work for them mainly out of loyalty to the people that raised him and gave him a home, and because he had nowhere else to turn. But now, witnessing Griselda, the truth smoldered within him like the ashes of their faith, reduced to mere lies. He wasn't angry because of what the church did. He was angry because what they did upsetted Griselda to the point where she didn't even bat an eye at him as he approached her. Sorella, he reached out to her, repeating the plea when she remained unresponsive. Sister, we've got to get out of here. Griselda's vacant gaze slowly shifted toward Zero, recognition dawning in her eyes. Her expression remained bewildered, as though the trauma of the scene before her had momentarily disconnected her from reality. Zero was reminded of an old saying, "The devil you know is better than the devil you don't." In his line of work, that was often true. At least he knew what he was dealing with in Griselda. The church and its secrets were another matter altogether. "Let's go," he repeated with urgency, gently gripping her arm and guiding her away from the grotesque spectacle. Griselda hesitated, her eyes lingering on the charred remains of the children. "They were innocent," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Innocent lives. Lost. How could this happen?" "I don't know, Griselda. I don't know. But this place is going to turn into an inferno if we don't get out soon." He knew better than to offer empty words of comfort. Instead, he focused on getting them out of the burning dungeon. As they retraced their steps through the narrow corridor, the heat and smoke became more suffocating, but it didn't seem to affect Griselda. What had taken hold of her was not the smoke or the heat, but those pint-sized corpses, strapped onto a wall where only in death they had found their escape. Leaving the burning monstrosity behind was a comparatively straightforward task when there were no surviving souls to rescue. Griselda remained silent throughout their escape, a stark contrast to her usual role as the moral compass and the scolder of Zero's questionable behavior. He found himself strangely missing her reprimands and the melodious sound of her voice, even if it meant enduring her disapproving sermons. His concern deepened as he occasionally glanced back at her, bearing witness to the shattered visage etched upon her normally stoic face. It was as if her spirit had been torn asunder, leaving behind an empty shell. While his usual emotions simmered within him, those fiery flames of anger and defiance, he recognized that now wasn't the time to unleash them. Not when Griselda was. Well, not in functioning order. The police officers and guards they encountered didn't dare question them, their inquiries promptly silenced by the presence of the blood-red Templar Order insignia on the front of his dark outfit. He noted several nuns and priests among the onlookers, and, while he harbored a fervent desire to interrogate them about their knowledge of the abominations festering beneath their place of worship, he understood that such inquiries could wait. The faces of these passers-by weren't indelibly etched into his memory, but he had his methods of discovering their identities. For now, at least, they ranked as his least pressing problem. As they distanced themselves from the gory spectacle, Zero finally elected to break the unsettling silence, addressing Griselda with a gentle, albeit slightly awkward, tone. "You want to talk about it? It might help, even just a smidgen." "It won't help them," Griselda replied, her voice void of emotion. "Nothing can help them now. Not even thoughts or prayers," Enzo affirmed, very much preserving his customary level of sarcasm. Nevertheless, the irony soon crumbled in the face of his ensuing sentence. "But it might help you." A fragile, forced smile momentarily graced Griselda's face, her eyes still tainted by the horrors she had recently been subjected to. It was a modest beginning, but Zero was unwavering in his determination to assist her in piecing back together some semblance of composure. "Come on," he encouraged her, "it's worth a shot." Griselda sighed. "We'll stop by the bridge. I need some time." "All right." They trod on in silence until they arrived at the ancient Arno River. Zero guided her to the weathered stone bridge, which, in the solitude of the late hour, offered the ideal setting for taking a moment to collect their thoughts. He ushered her toward a weathered bench and gestured for her to sit, perching himself on the stone railing beside her. Removing his hood, he unveiled his unruly brown hair that was in dire need of a trim at the sides. As they perched there in contemplation, the moonlight gently caressed the shimmering waters of the Arno River. The bridge, a relic of a bygone era, seemed almost like a guardian of secrets, its age-old stones whispering tales of those who had passed over its span. It was the kind of place where even silence had its own eloquence. Her once fierce resolve now reduced to smoldering embers, Griselda sat straight by the bench, her gaze locked on the placid river, its surface a mirror reflecting the stars above. She appeared lost in a realm of her own thoughts, a universe of anguish and despair. Usually the master of quips and sarcasm, Enzo sensed that humor was not the salve for these wounds. Instead, he found solace in the tranquility of the night, punctuated only by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant echoes of the city's nocturnal life. A soft breeze whisked through, carrying with it the scent of the river and the centuries of history that seemed to cling to this ancient place. The world paused for a moment, granting them the respite they so sorely needed. In this hushed moment, Zero regarded the river, its waters illuminated by the celestial canopy above, and found himself pondering the peculiar twists of fate that had brought him to this very bridge. He had always been a man of action, quick to seize the moment, but for once, he allowed the stillness to wash over him. He leaned back slightly, casting his gaze upon the brilliant constellations speckling the firmament. "You know," he began with a hint of whimsy, "I once read somewhere that if you connect the stars in the sky, you can create your own constellations. I wonder if that's how they come up with the official ones, just a bunch of creative stargazers playing cosmic connect the dots." Griselda turned her gaze to the heavens, her eyes tracing the unseen lines between the stars. She offered a faint, appreciative smile. A contemplative pause hung between them, an interlude in the symphony of the night. Griselda finally spoke, her words cautious but laced with the hint of vulnerability that marked a genuine connection. "They were children, Enzo. Innocent children, and they had nobody." Zero's demeanor shifted from humor to concern. He shifted his gaze back to her, his eyes locked onto hers. "You had no idea either, huh?" he began. "No," Griselda replied. Her tone remained stoic, but her ice-blue eyes betrayed glimpses of emotion, particularly when her mind wandered to less stable places. "Did you? Not about this particular horror," he admitted. "But I've had my share of doubts, of things that didn't quite add up. The church has its secrets, and I've always known that." "How?" "A little bird told me," Zero replied cryptically, keeping the revelation of the crimson-haired devil to himself for now. He intended to disclose that piece of information at the right moment, allowing Grisela to believe it was one of his well-placed contacts. "They also mentioned that it wasn't the only place." Grisela's expression turned bitter. "I know," she seethed. "Those people, they talked. At least a dozen other places." "Ah," Zero responded with an understanding nod. Those individuals who had leaked such vital information had met a grim end, and he couldn't help but agree that their fate was well-deserved. He might argue that death was a merciful end for them, but Grisela would likely counter that they would face judgment in the depths of hell. The oppressive heat, carried by the night wind, draped around them, and in the distance, a portion of the sky was adorned with a bluish-green hue. It instilled a sense of melancholy in Zero, evoking a poetic mood, the perfect backdrop for him to articulate his intentions. "You know I can't go back, right?" he began, his voice laced with a hint of uncertainty, trying to discern her reaction. He wanted to see in her eyes signs of sadness, concern, or perhaps even anger. "There's a limit to how blind I can act, and I was already half blind before this whole fiasco started." However, Grisela's response wasn't marked by those expected emotions. Instead, her gaze met his with a solemn understanding tinged with a trace of regret. "I understand," she replied, offering a smile that Zero found utterly pathetic. "I can't force you to stay." She chuckled weakly. "Perhaps it's in our best interest that you don't stay. You'll only cause more trouble." "That's a given." She smiled faintly, a bittersweet curve of her lips. "I don't doubt you'll do well on your own. Maybe even better." Enzo's mind danced with the memory of his unconventional upbringing, divided between the orphanage, the monastery, and the unruly streets. His adventurous spirit had perpetually clashed with the idea of being a well-behaved boy confined to one place, a notion consistently at odds with the adult's wishes. He recalled Dulio, in particular, who had encouraged his exuberance, much to Grisela's chagrin. Forcing him to stay put is to kill his adventurous soul, and murder is a cardinal sin, sister. Amused by the memory, Enzo smirked. Grisela had never scolded him for sneaking out of the monastery after that day. She'd only chastise him upon his return, usually injured and laden with an assortment of problems, such as stolen bread, smuggled candies, or irate mothers and tearful children, all conquered by a parentless child in wrestling matches. Apparently, having parents made one a better wrestler. But now, it wasn't about him. He had connections both above and below, mostly below, and could navigate the world just fine. It was Grisela whom he was most concerned about. She had served the church faithfully despite everything, and for them to commit such atrocious acts was bound to have a profound impact on her. "What about you?" he inquired, turning the focus back to her. "I have to stay," she said, stolid. "It's a deep-rooted internal problem. It must be dealt with from within. I must know there are others that knew, but chose to remain silent. My faith in the church's potential for good remains." Enzo couldn't help but ponder if the church still warranted such benevolence. Nevertheless, Grisela's experience surpassed his own, and he respected her conviction. Raising an eyebrow sardonically, he couldn't resist his characteristic sarcasm. "Or, there's always the forcibly unearth the problematic roots with an ample dose of righteous violence option." Her swift and sharp glare was followed by a softening expression, marking a transition in their dialogue, which shifted toward a more earnest tone. "I'll declare you've gone missing," she stated, her voice unwavering. "It might buy you a week, perhaps even less, before they officially excommunicate you." Enzo gave a sardonic chuckle at Grisela's declaration. "So, I get a week of freedom before being formally shunned by the church. Quite the gift." Grisela's eyes softened as she looked at him, the weight of the situation heavy on her shoulders. "I'll do what I can to delay it, but you need to go far away, Enzo. The church won't forget your role in this, even if you weren't involved in their sinister schemes." "Trust me, sister," he replied with a wry grin, "I've always been good at vanishing." "That you are," she smiled. "What will you do next?" Enzo understood that her question was more about her own concerns than his future plans. He pondered for a moment, contemplating what his future might hold. He had no intentions of uprooting the church or waging a one-man crusade. This newfound freedom presented an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance to chase, or at least figure out, what he truly wanted to do in life. "I'm thinking of taking up some freelancing work," he continued. The kind that offers a fresh start, opportunities to chase. Maybe a bit of this, a bit of that." He offered a vague smile, but the underlying implication of his words didn't escape her. Grisela's frown deepened. She understood that Enzo had that side and the capacity in him to not allow morals affect his performance, but her concern for his safety remained. Her stern tone softened with a touch of desperation. "Don't let this experience turn you down a darker path," she sighed. "You've always been a force for good, even if you do have a knack for causing trouble. You're far too talented for those unsavory activities." He couldn't help but be touched by her concern, and he was aware that his choice might not align with her vision of his future. But this was his own future to shape. His decision, not the church, not hers, his. "I appreciate your faith in me, sister, but sometimes you have to use the tools you've got. And these skills of mine, They're as much a curse as a blessing, really. But don't worry, I'll make sure it's worth it. I'll try to keep a balance, you know. Grisela nodded, a sense of understanding in her eyes, even if she didn't entirely approve. She leaned closer, her voice softer, her concern deeper. Just promise me you won't lose yourself in the process. Enzo tried to lighten the mood, channeling a touch of his usual humor. Well, perhaps I'll embark on an adventurous journey to the great beyond. Death is an odyssey, after all, and all that jazz. Grisela wasn't amused, and her stern gaze remained fixed on him. Enzo, there's the stone-cold strict sister he'd been looking for. Ah, one of my regrettable jests, sister, he replied, attempting to inject a touch of levity. You can attribute it to Lent's influence. She's 5 years her junior. She left a very memorable impression. They exchanged a fond smile, acknowledging that this could be their last moment together for some time, but not their final farewell. Still, goodbyes were the hardest. Zenobia will be very upset, she whispered with a heavy sigh. Irina even more so. An inquisitive arch graced Enzo's brow at the mention of Zenovia's name. Zenobia, like himself, had the opportunity to choose her own name. However, in those formative years, while Enzo was busy dreaming of owning a Ferrari, Zenobia was lost in a world of alien sci-fi movies. But her, Zenovia, that Zenovia, Irina's wanting to throttle me upon our next encounter is a foregone conclusion, but Novi, the epitome of all things prim and proper. She's practically the opposite of me. Grisela's tone held a subtle revelation. She's not as honest about her feelings as she'd have you believe. You'd be surprised how much she truly cares about you. That's so, he muttered. Well, too late now. Never expected her to be it soon. Irina always had a way of turning every conversation into a lecture on justice, and Zenovia's enthusiasm for a fight never wavered. I think they'll be fine. You try to keep in touch, if possible. He nodded. I'll write them a letter or something once I find my new calling. He shrugged. Novi, HM. She reminds me of you, sorta, in more ways than one. Her naggings, her scoldings, her everyday behavior, the way she fights. It's like she's trying to be you. She even copies your impressive bosoms. Grisela warned him with a steely look. Cross that line again, and you'll find that magic may not affect you, but my hands certainly can. A snort escaped Enzo, followed by a hushed, goblin-like cackle. You know, sister, I never thought I'd say this, but I might miss your spanks. Grisela rolled her eyes, a hint of a smile lingering. I'll miss you too, of course, he added, grinning. Mutually, she whispered, her smile tinged with wistfulness. Don't push yourself too recklessly. You might believe you possess all the tools for survival, Enzo, but there's always more to learn. Always more lessons to be had, understood, he mock saluted. You don't need to worry about me, sister. If not me, who else will? He adopted a mock serious tone. Touching, but you might want to allocate those worry points to someone else who requires them more, like Novia, Irina, or Lint. In particular, Lint. She's bound to catch on sooner or later. I will. Grisela softly chuckled as she rose from her seat, took a deep breath, and enveloped him in an embrace. He didn't retort this time, letting himself sink fully. He deeply appreciated the gesture, but both of them understood that she needed this more than he did. Grisela never lingered for long whenever there was an adoption. It was always the realization that she could never compete with a real family that hurt her the most. Be well, be safe, she whispered. Ah, you know that last part is nigh impossible. Try, she insisted, her eyes filled with concern. Then, with a gentle push, she encouraged him to move away. Go. You don't have much time. Don't stay in this country. Leave the continent if you can. If they hunt you down, I don't know what I won't be hunted down. That's a promise. Grisela let out a sigh, her emotions teetering on the edge. No matter where you are, you'll always be in my prayers. Appreciate that, he nodded, feeling the gravity of their parting. She was on the verge of tears, and he knew it was best to leave before he succumbed to the same fate. Well, adieu. Wait, that's French. Arrive at her side, Mia Sorella. One pop of his grappling hook later, her little Enzo disappeared from sight, his rapid footsteps swiftly fading into the distance. As he departed, regret crept in, and sorrow welled up uncontrollably. Familial fears, worries, and self-doubt flooded the void inside her. Had allowing him to forge his own path been the right choice? Should she have consulted Dulio before letting him go? However, Grisela silenced those thoughts, firming her resolve and reminding herself of her own responsibilities. But she pushed those thoughts aside, reaffirming her commitment to her own responsibilities. Enzo was an independent adult now, capable of looking out for himself. The children, on the other hand, the subjects of the Holy Sword Project, had been silenced for far too long. It was high time someone heard their cries. Break. Right. First things first. Zero found himself facing a pressing issue, his empty pockets and the daunting prospect of getting out of the country. His career as an exorcist and Knight Templar had promised heavenly rewards but had left his wallet as barren as a church on a Monday morning. Their currency consisted of thanks and exposure, which, it turned out, couldn't buy him a decent meal, let alone a ticket out of the country. Confronted with this dire financial situation, he concocted a plan that felt more akin to Robin Hood than a righteous knight, robbing vending machines. After all, who would miss a few €100, especially in Giudino di Boboli, a tourist haven? Surely, there were vending machines hidden in this garden like secrets in a confessional. As he ventured deeper into the enchanting labyrinth of greenery, his hope waned with every step. The garden statues, though artistically captivating to many, failed to impress Zero for their inability to be converted into cold, hard cash. Surely, he thought, there had to be one vending machine somewhere among these magnificent sculptures. Must be here, somewhere, at least one, surely. But alas, Lady Luck was not on his side that day. The garden seemed devoid of these elusive treasure troves. Son of a fuck. The string of curses flowing from his lips grew in both volume and creativity as he continued on. His quest for financial sustenance met with empty disappointment. Zero muttered his frustrations under his breath, skillfully dodging the occasional patrol. Not that he feared getting caught, talking himself out of trouble was his forte. No, his true motive for avoiding them was to sharpen his stealth skills. After all, one never knew when an aristocrat's mansion might require some lightening of their worldly possessions. Now that he was free from the clutches of the church, he embraced risk with open arms. Hood up, mask on, he embarked on his self-appointed mission. Yet, he saw himself as no common thief, but instead a relocator of wealth, a humble intermediary between the privileged and the penniless, with himself falling into the latter category. This rationalization comforted him as he scoured the garden's nooks and crannies for a vending machine. Yet not a devil, apparently. But fate had other plans. Zero's journey took an unexpected turn when he stumbled upon a trail of blood, nature's crimson graffiti on the lush canvas of the garden. The garden's oblivious patrols paid no heed, but Zero's curiosity was piqued. Following the macabre breadcrumbs, he was led to a crimson-haired devil sprawled in a remote corner of the garden. She was losing consciousness, sprawled out in an alluring but pitiful manner that didn't escape Zero's amused scrutiny. It was more an opportunity for teasing than that of a gallant knight, and he couldn't resist a dry quip. Well, look who stumbled into my corner of paradise, he remarked, eyeing her with a smirk. Ria's reflexes kicked in as she abruptly turned over, firing off a bolt of pure destructive energy. It crackled with power but fizzled upon contact, dissipating harmlessly against his cheek. A light sleeper of a devil, apparently. Recognition dawned in Ria's eyes as relief washed over her. It's you, she breathed, her voice trembling with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Fancy meeting you here, princess. If you're here to hire me for a quest, I'll have to inform you that my rates have gone up. Finally decided to harvest my soul, Reaper. Yes, Taizai, my editor, Signorina, he greeted, unfazed by the attack and surprisingly unsurprised by her bedraggled appearance. Leaves adorned her hair, and feverish sweat glistened on her brow. She may have been far from her royal best, but even in her wretched state, an unmistakable beauty clung to her like an alluring aura. He studied her for a moment, weighing his options. He might have toured luck with the vending machines, but if he could lug her around the city to find a willing buyer, then. If yes, he added, his tone sardonic, what will you do? That pretty head of yours is worth a lot of coin, I don't doubt. Test me, if you dare, Riaz coughed. She had no defiance or fear in her tone, seemingly able to read that he was only making a jest. He snorted. Oh, I like you. Goodness, I don't know whether I should be glad to see you or anyone else, Riaz mused, a mixture of emotions crossing her weakened features. I see you've found quite creative ways to look worse than our first encounter. I didn't expect the Reaper to be a comedian, she confessed, her sardonic wit still shining through. Zero knelt down beside her, his amusement giving way to genuine concern. You didn't expect a lot of things, did you? Touché. Riaz managed a faint smile, though it faltered as her energy continued to ebb. I'm afraid the minutes haven't been as kind to me as it is to you, Riaz chuckled weakly, wincing as she attempted to stand, her hand clutching her stomach wound. What brings you here? Vending machines. The answer managed to confuse her despite her condition. Not important. Look, I thought I told you to get away from here. I'm afraid I'm not in the right condition to fulfill that requirement. She slumped forward, and he instinctively caught her to prevent her from falling. She sighed in frustration. I can't even stand properly. Evidently, I thought you devils would be more resilient than this. Some are simply sturdier than others. Resilience is not my strongest point, she weakly replied, not even having the energy to lift her cheek off his shoulder. Thanks for catching me. But you happen to have caught me in the middle of me dying as well, Sir Reaper Templar. Dying? Zero frowned. He'd found himself a potential gold mine, and it was already in the process of crumbling. Poisoned, she coughed, blood staining her lips. And it doesn't help that I'm surrounded by exorcists in this country. Why did you come to this country in the first place? He inquired, his curiosity tinged with genuine bewilderment. Duty calls, some might say. She forced a chuckle, though it was cut short by another fit of coughing, leaving a few drops of blood on the lapel of his uniform. Wonderful. Devil blood. He'd need holy water to actually clean them now. You're heavier than you look, he quipped with feigned annoyance, knowing full well she was lighter than her appearance suggested. But he had an insatiable urge to tease people, no matter the time or place. Her response was a disapproving frown, a valiant attempt to maintain dignity even in her weakened state. Very gentlemanly of you to mention a lady's weight. Are all Templars this tactless, or is it just you? You'd be surprised, he retorted, maintaining a watchful eye on her despite the casual banter. He was prepared for any sudden movements, ready to react swiftly if she tried to reach for his weapons. But she attempted neither. Instead, Riaz's frail form slumped against his shoulder, her head resting heavily upon it. She seemed utterly drained, her ragged breathing matching the weak rhythm of her heartbeat. If she was feigning her condition, he would have to hand it to her. She was doing a convincing job. "Do you have any idea what poisoned you?" he inquired, his tone less playful as he offered a potential lifeline. "I may have some antidotes. Not an expert in that field, unfortunate, NGH, lie. He was, however, immune to magic, but also not being able to cast any magic himself, he had to improvise, adapt, and annihilate. While he treated her wound, he recalled the distinct symptoms and characteristics of her injury. It was a classic case of a dagger coated in holy water, potentially a sword given the affinity that exorcists had for their sacred blades. It could have been a sword, but Enzo preferred the versatility of his daggers. However, he kept this information to himself, not wanting to reveal his involvement just yet. If he was dumb, he'd gloat and tell her that his dagger that pierced her shoulder was coated in the same divine substance. But she didn't need to know that. "You're well enough to sass around. Can't be that bad. It's a defense mechanism. We all have our ways," she explained weakly, her humor not entirely extinguished. There was a certain charm to her resilience. "That we do," he could agree on that. "In a completely irrelevant topic to your current predicament, do you happen to own a mansion?" "Mansion." Seeing his plain motive, she managed to rasp out a giggle out of her dry throat. She'd thrown most of her shame away. At the time, she couldn't care less that she was resting upon the reluctant hold of her supposed enemy. He was warmer than the grass, and that was all she asked. "Not mine, but my parents'. I happen to live in one." He winced, hope of easy cash fading. "Erg, past tense. If you're expecting compensation for helping me, then I'm afraid I don't have much to offer. Now I find myself here, poisoned and in the company of a Templar. Regrettably, I am presently homeless and penniless. The most I can offer is my gratitude. ... Or perhaps," she sighed into his ear. A sultry tone that was. "He'd rather have my body." Enzo snorted at her teasing. "Vile temptress, try again when you're not spilling blood on my clothes," he retorted, and the two shared a quiet laugh. It was a moment of laughter in the face of absurdity and the uncertain fate that had brought them together. He sniffed. "You kinda stink, do you?" She smelled nice for someone that looked like they had fallen off a roof, was what he meant. "First my weight, now my scent. You truly are a monster, as they say." "I have a reputation to keep," he replied with a grin. His voice had a rough edge to it, not the smoothest, but it had a certain masculine charm that suited his roguish appearance, reminiscent of the Renaissance era. Riaz chuckled, her weak but cheerful banter with Zero providing a momentary respite from their dire circumstances. Though it's a shame, you being penniless as well. I was hoping you'd carry a bit of gold." "The disappointment is mutual," he hummed, playing along. "Being a Templar means you are to surrender your worldly desires and possessions, apparently. I won't be poor for long, though." She enjoyed it in particular. "Being a Templar means you are to surrender your worldly desires and possessions, apparently. I won't be poor for long, though." "How optimistic of you," she teased, her voice growing faint as exhaustion took hold. "Much as I'd love to stay and chat. I might be losing the rest of my consciousness within any seconds now, if you would. Pardon me." With those words, Riaz slumped further against him, her breathing growing weaker. Left alone to make a critical decision that would determine her fate, Enzo regarded her for a moment, contemplating the course of action. "Weird gal," he muttered with a hint of amusement. He knew he didn't have much time before the approaching patrols would discover them. Even with his Templar uniform, it would be suspicious to be found carrying an unconscious woman covered in blood, especially with her clothes originally being white. Thinking quickly, he reached into his pouch and retrieved a marble-like object. With a practiced motion, he tossed it in the opposite direction of their current location. A bright flash erupted from the object, followed by the startled curses of the approaching guards. They believed it to be a mere prank with fireworks. Taking advantage of the diversion, Zero swiftly hoisted Riaz over his shoulder and carried her in the opposite direction. Fresh adventure awaited him, and this unexpected turn of events was the escape he had been waiting for, free from the church's grip, and a legitimate reason to distance himself without breaking Grisela's heart. A fresh start, back to zero, and he couldn't have hoped for a more interesting beginning. It was thanks to her intelligence that she had survived this long in a world where her kin were widely despised, treated and hunted down like dogs and executed without a fair trial. Her intelligence had been her shield, allowing her to outmaneuver her enemies and survive to this day. Yet, as she groggily woke up from a deep slumber, her hazy vision slowly focusing on the stone bricks reflecting the orange glow of a candle next to the bed, she realized that her intelligence alone hadn't saved her this time. "You're finally awake," greeted her unlikely savior, the one who had once been her hunter. That didn't take long. Riaz managed to catch him checking his watch, leaning against the wall with his hood and mask still concealing his features. She grunted as she attempted to sit up, the pain surging through her body. It was as if her entire being had become a canvas for agony. Her breath caught as she clutched her aching stomach, her brows furrowing in distress. "Expected you'd be out until morning. You devils are, as they say, built different, eh?" "Some, not all," she corrected through gritted teeth, the pain intensifying with the effort. Pain, pain, pain. Their sting was all she felt as she forced herself to sit. Even getting up to sit felt like someone stabbing her again, a sensation she wasn't keen on getting familiar with. The thin blanket slid off her chest, and seeing the fresh bandages around her stomach provided enough insight into what had transpired during her unconsciousness. She pulled the sheet to cover her otherwise exposed chest, not out of embarrassment, but because her royal blood demanded she retain a semblance of dignity and self-respect, even in her current predicament. "Where are we?" she inquired, her voice trembling with discomfort. "Florence." An abandoned mansion turned into a ramshackle refuge. "It'll be a while before the patrols start snooping around old, dilapidated sheds," he said nonchalantly, tilting his hooded face toward the bedside table. "Though I wouldn't rule it out entirely." "I see. You sound oddly experienced." "Yeah, I'm a bit of a rascal," he said. "Drink up," he suggested, the dry tone of his words not disguising his amusement. "You sound as though you've just swallowed a toad." Her face formed a frown of both pain and mild annoyance. "A true gentleman, aren't you?" It was probably the first time anyone had been so straightforward in telling her that her voice sounded as though she had just swallowed an amphibian due to its hoarseness. Back in her estate, the housekeepers would have hurried to her side, armed with an array of medications and a glass of the purest water. Lately, however, Riaz had grown accustomed to making do with less. She took a sip from the water bottle, screwing the cap back on and placing it on her lap, a soft groan escaping her as she clutched her head. The sharp pains finally made themselves heard again. Her body screamed in protest. Her shoulder felt like it was being prodded by a red-hot iron rod. Then came the waves of nausea, the pounding headache, and an assortment of discomforts that made her regret waking up. Yet, even in her pitiful state, a lady mustn't forget her manners. "Thank you," she whispered, clearing her throat, "for helping me." He glanced at her, a nonchalant HM, escaping his lips. "I'm in your debt," she continued. "And an H. I hope you don't intend to ask for compensation just yet." "Yeah, we agreed that it can wait," he replied, leaning back on a chair positioned opposite the bed, his arms resting on the headrest. He slung his head there, his eyes locked on her. Riaz was aware he was studying her, his gaze skimming over her body, making her feel even more vulnerable than her injuries already did. However, she had expected this turn of events. No man, let alone an established devil hunter, would readily offer assistance to a devil without expecting something in return. After all, even if it was in jest, she had offered herself as a reward. "What are you doing?" he asked when Riaz let go of the blanket that had concealed her bandaged form, exposing her chest. "No need to be coy with me," she sighed, reclining against the makeshift pillows stacked behind her and closing her eyes. "I'm completely at your mercy. Do unto me as you wish. I won't resist." If her eyes had been open, she would have noticed the odd look on his face. "Amusing that you think I'm after your body, Signorina Gremory. I know you don't hold us hunters in high regard, seeing us as not much different from hired killers but with a religious endorsement, but your presumption is rather offensive. How terribly demeaning of you." Quickly, she recognized the blunder in her words. She sighed and chuckled at her own foolishness. "My apologies," she admitted, smiling wryly. "Hey, I'm just teasing. Thank you for the offer, but maybe another time." "Hey." Riaz's eyes fluttered open, an enigmatic glint dancing within them. "You seem more civilized than I expected, Reaper. I admit my judgment of your character was hasty." She maintained her wry smile. "Maybe I should have offered some roses instead of myself." The humor in her tone didn't escape him, and he chuckled in response. "Roses might have worked." Riaz's smile deepened, displaying a glimmer of her wittiness. "You're not at all what I expected, considering our history," she remarked. He leaned back, his eyes never leaving her. Expectations and reality often diverge. She wistfully gazed down on her lap, at her hands that were once smoother than silk, now riddled with subtle calluses. "You all right there?" "Forgive me, I never felt this helpless, you see," Riaz said with lingering shame. "I'm a devil, and you're one of the most notorious hunters alive. I can't say I'm not the least bit concerned about my safety around you and your motives for keeping me alive this long. No offense," brown-nosing him now. Well, Enzo didn't say a word because he didn't mind having his ego stroked now and then. "I also hate carrying an unpaid debt as well, and, frankly, I can't wrap my head around as to why you saved me. I didn't expect to be alive, to be honest." He eyed her for a moment. He found noblewomen to be strange, like they were from some fantasy land or some sort of loony town where they had balls and drank wine and gossip about other noblewomen. While Riaz didn't appear to belong in that category, he still found her a little bit strange. In a good way, maybe. "Well, I didn't help you just so I can fuck you, that much I can tell." She flinched a little at his bluntness, surprised that the infamous, enigmatic Reaper would be so, well, ordinarily crass. "Why did you help me then, if I may ask?" His reply came with a shrug. "It felt like something new, something worth doing. Everything I've done up to now has been routine, minus the rescuing you part. You showed me the ugly part of the church and I guess I'm now holding you accountable for it." "Accountable? Yeah, I'm sticking around. See where you go and where it leads." You look like someone that never ran out of a plan. "I see." She had no plan at all though. Riaz had expected death to finally come for her earlier night. She kept it to herself, cautious that it might disappoint him, and forge one on the spot in accordance to her current predicament. Well, my plan right now is to recover, if that's what you wanted to know." He gave several light nods. "That's part of it, I guess. I want to know what comes after. Are you going to raid another monastery that endorses raising their own child soldiers?" Riaz held herself. That I do, and Zoe observed her carefully, his eyes never leaving her as they delved into a silent understanding. He knew that her circumstances were dire, and the choices she had to make were often steeped in shades of gray. The line between good and evil blurred, especially when one faced the injustices of the world head-on. Why? She lifted her head to meet his curious gaze. If I say because it's the right thing to do, will you believe me? Not completely. A smile. It's not the entire truth, I must admit. She took a deep breath, lifting up the covers up to her neck again as it was getting chilly, groaned a little from the aching, and sighed. I'm looking for someone important to me, like a brother, she confessed, sounding as if she was doubting if the feeling was mutual. He flew here a couple of weeks ago. I believe he's doing all he can to put an end to the church's madness, though not in the most peaceful of ways, I'm afraid. He sensed that there were several key points in her story that she didn't share yet, but that was enough for now. He didn't need the specifics. Got any idea where he is now? No, I was looking for clues myself. Unfortunate, Zero hummed, before pensively staring out the window. Do you care about them? The children, I mean. The unfortunate test subjects, he clarified. Just curious. Of course, she immediately retorted, wincing right after because she just hurt herself by moving. NNGH. It doesn't matter what they are to me. Devil I might be and human they are, they're still children. Born to merely be indoctrinated into a twisted component to an already existing conflict. You'd hate to be in Africa then. Or Syria, he pondered for a little moment. Or the majority of the Middle East. Riaz frowned. Did he think it was all just a joke? Is there a point to this? Not really, he replied blandly. It just crossed my mind again that there are places out there that do this kind of messed up shit regularly, and frankly, I'm not that bothered. Does that bother you? That was unexpected. He was self-aware. Always a good trait to spot in someone else. It was difficult to try and guess his expression as he had most of his features hidden, but his eyes were actually quite expressive. Definitely not the eyes of a stone-cold killer as the rumors went. It's likely because Italy isn't as conflict-ridden as the places you mentioned, she replied, her tone pondering. The young ones here have more opportunities than being thrown into the grinder of large-scale conflict. But when it comes to the church, they have an abundance of able-minded and willing bodies, yet they choose to groom the young into wielding swords. It raises the question, for what purpose? What's their excuse? Well, aren't you a diplomat? He chuckled, completely taken aback by her response. You didn't have to make me feel better about it, you know. I was just blabbering randomly. True, but you didn't have to save my life, nurse me back to health, and bring me here, she countered with a slight grin. I was simply dying randomly. He returned her grin, appreciating her quick wit. Don't think that you've cleared your debt just by lifting my spirits. Riaz softly laughed. Pity, I had my hopes up. Yeah, well, you should rest some more while you can, he said then, getting up from his seat. The search parties are out and they're looking for scapegoats. The sooner we leave this place, the better. Not ideal but could be worse. That proved he had been watching for those patrols then. How nice of him. Riaz couldn't believe her luck this time, but couldn't refrain herself from wondering if it would run out soon. But then she realized something about what he just said. He said. Don't get me wrong, Signorina, I'll likely be marked as a fugitive or a stray within a week or less for assisting you. However, I have a hunch that sticking around you might prove more beneficial in the long run. 2 heads are often better than 1, wouldn't you agree? Riaz wasn't concerned about that, knowing she had her own share of troubles, and having him as an ally was undoubtedly a valuable asset. Still, she couldn't help but raise the issue. But are you? Won't the night orders hunt you down? Eliminate you? Zero tilted his head slightly as he considered her question. The church and the night order will probably want my head on a platter once they sniff out I helped you out, he said, the memories of a certain excommunicated holy maiden etching in his mind. But I've danced with danger before. Besides, the church has ways of sweeping things under the rug when it's convenient for them. That I understand, but you belong to the Templar. There's a reason they're referred to as the Christian Front's bloodhounds. Well, true. The Templars did carry their reputation, and they wore it like a badge of honor. The church's faithful hounds, diligently tracking and eliminating those they label as threats to the faith. But then again, I've never been much of a hound. More like a stray dog who wandered into the wrong pack. What will they do to you? Riaz cut the chase. Should they find you, they'll try to recapture me. There's a reason there's not many Templars around, even in this country. Unlike the normal case for the unnaturals or the unholy miscreants that are insults to God's creation. Should they capture me, I'll be brainwashed instead of being put to the sword. Be put back on the right path as they prefer to call it. Of course, Riaz muttered, unsure whether she should be bothered by the church's usage of such an egregious, dehumanizing method or his apparent lack of concern. He could determine someone's value from their reaction, and his apathy was, at the very least, disturbing. She'd rather be pitted against someone with black and white morality than someone like him. Someone that would draw and redraw the lines as they see fit. Besides, it's not every day a Knight Templar gets to hang around a twisted creature of the darkest pits of hell. He continued as smoothly as he did earlier. Figured I can learn a thing or two about the devils from you. Your faith has a lot of names for us. Riaz managed to let out a chuckle, though it did pain her chest a fair bit. Negligible, for the moment. You wish to understand your enemy. Need I remind you that tolerance is bred through understanding, and tolerance begets heresy in the eyes of your people. He laughed at that. It wasn't exactly a pleasant sound. Had the tone of a sneer, like he was mocking something. Specifically the church. I was never seen as one of them. Sort of like that street kid in a class of elites that is there because his parents have the right connections. Those that are out in the fields. Sure, they treat me as their own. If there's anyone I fought for, then it's for them. But those in the higher chain of commands. No, they never see me as one of them. We're just pawns, ultimately. Oh, how come? You wear their colors and everything. Her sarcasm wasn't missed. He appreciated it, rather. Sure, I wear their brand logo and work for them, but I was never a true Templar. I'm sure it's easy for you or anyone else, really, to see why. He spread his hands to present himself, guiltlessly shrugging. Rhea supposed he was a unique case even among those elite and brutal enforcers of the Christian faith. Well, considering he labeled the reputable Templar insignia as a brand logo, she could understand why. You were tolerated, she surmised. Certamente. Yes indeed. They tolerated me because I was endorsed by a person with, well, someone with so much power that they don't even have to use it. Picture that. Rhea's imagined just so. She found it to be a salivating position to be in, to not have to lift a finger for people to be acknowledged. Dulio, she immediately guessed. It was either him or Vasco Strada, but it had to be Dulio Gesualdo. That joker was Heaven's Blade, renowned for his flippant and happy-go-lucky attitude. What separates a Templar from other orders? We are extremely good at killing without need of justification. Never ask, never worry, never fear. Because the Father will guide us, and so on. Do you believe in it? I believe that in essence, they're doing it for the betterment of people. While you are certainly an upstanding, unnatural being that respects our cultures and rules, there are admittedly those that aren't too concerned about it and do as they please, thinking they can always get away with it. He paused, before continuing with a smirk under his cloth mask. But mainly I stuck around because I'm damn good at what I do, and I do enjoy the things I'm good at. Rhea bristled. Her entire body was washed by a sense of fear and trepidation and slammed with uncertainty as she saw a glimpse of his true self, an unapologetic executioner. He might not be the most powerful man she'd met, but if the stories were right, the rumors weren't baseless rumors, then there stood in the same room as her, a man who was capable of doing many terrible things she couldn't even begin to imagine. But in their eyes, I'm just some punk that got lucky and a disrespectful heretic that never participated in singing the hymn chant. Just happened to be an untouchable one. But I guess that toleration did beget heresy, because here I am, fraternizing with our sworn enemy. Homeless yet again. You had so much, Rhea said, regaining her composure. Aren't you, at least, a little bit concerned of the kind of life you're about to sentence yourself into? I've heard of how they treated their own so-called holy maiden for helping a devil. Well, riding someone's coattails isn't really my thing. Easy living even more so, Zero stated with a glimmer in his eyes. The dangerous kind of an adventurer that thought he'd seen it all. He was determined to take this road, she could tell. This wasn't something he decided over a night. This was an opportunity he'd waited for who knows how long. Despite all the danger signs practically screaming at her, Rhea did not have the luxury of rejecting help, no matter where it might come from. Even if it came from one of her deadliest enemies. She needed time to recuperate, and being stuck in likely the hottest zone in all of Italy, the country where exorcists roamed the streets dressed as normal civilians and seen as defender of the faith against the underworld's ilk, was not the most ideal of situations she could be trapped in without any sort of help. I suppose that leaves me in your care for the moment. Zero gave her a nod, smiling behind his mask. The rogue Templar and the fugitive devil, he declared chipperly, causing a small smile to grace her face. Now get some sleep. I'll wake you up if there's a need. Break. That need arrived before dawn cracked. Rhea was woken up by a light joy to her side and a rather urgent "we gotta go" coming from a familiar voice of an unknown face. She hastily, but gingerly as to not make too many unnecessary movements, raised from the bed. She noticed he had positioned himself next to a door, setting up an ambush as rushed footsteps and clattering could be heard coming from the floor below, followed by several barks. Hounds, Rhea frowned. She'd rather not hurt an animal. She also preferred to not escape the town topless, a fact that the Reaper took notice with a quick glance, and promptly pointed his gloved finger at the chair where her bloody dress shirt was set. Hurriedly donning her shirt, not yet bothering with the buttons just yet, Rhea tossed him a questioning look, wondering what he was planning to do next. He responded by nudging at the window, to which she responded back with reluctance and hesitation, clutching her stomach, as if already feeling it opening again. But he insisted, by nudging his head harder. Rhea knew she didn't have another choice and obeyed, standing by the window as she anxiously stared at him. Despite their previous interaction, she still couldn't shrug off the chance that he might abandon her to her pursuers and that this was all just a cruel ruse to completely shatter her hope. But he was her only hope of leaving this place alive. Meanwhile, unaware of her distrust, Zero scooped up a tiny ball out of his satchel, opened the door a tiny bit, and let it roll outside before slamming the door hard. The noise he made quickly alerted the patrols and they stampeded upstairs, heading towards their room just as a flash erupted from the gaps of the door. Rhea saw misty blue smoke spilling in their bedroom, followed by several thuds and whines of the canines. Whatever that gas was, she could only hope it was nothing lethal as he walked up next to her. Did you? Anesthetics, he told her assuredly, waggling his eyebrows up and down as if to brag of his non-lethal takedowns despite the shock in her face. Riaz didn't have the time to process why this so-called night order had this sort of weapons in their arsenal as she heard more people climbing up the stairs, yelling orders in Italian. Prego, can you fly? I can glide. Good enough, he decided for the two of them, and exited out the window. Dumbfounded, Riaz peered over to look just in time to watch him scale down with ease and an impressive show of athleticism, using the tiniest of ledges as his stepping stone or break his fall, pausing only momentarily to observe his surroundings as he agilely descended as if he'd climbed this building 1,000 times. A shadowy figure easily scales down the side of a large building, nimbly avoiding obstacles as they go. Her fellow nobles would be concerned with their security if they saw this man in action. He landed safely down below, jogged a little further away before gesturing to what she could interpret as her to jump over. So she leapt. Her wings sprouted and carried her across the air, feeling the chill of the young morning breeze and the sting of her unhealed wound. Her landing was clumsier than she'd like to admit. The sudden jolt of pain caused her to wince and lose her balance. Lucky he was there to catch her, otherwise her body might have to meet the concrete. There was an odd sense of warmth and safety as she landed right into his arms. She found it funny that someone all devils wanted to avoid the most had become her unlikely ally. Temporary or not, she couldn't care that far yet. Thanks, she managed to say. He nodded plainly. Can you ride a horse? She shook her head as she placed her hand over her stomach. At the moment, not without the risk of tipping and falling over. Capito, with another nod, a quicker one this time, as he skimped over to hug the corner of the building, motioning her to follow him. And once she did, he panned towards her again. Wait here. Riaz obeyed, curious of his plan while he set forth towards the front of the building, pace crouching under the window sills. She would not shy away from action, but due to her injury, she didn't mind standing at the sideline and contributing as little as she should in fear of bungling this escape. Not 10 seconds later, he came back on top of a chestnut-furred horse armored in black Kevlar with the POLIZIA in big white letters engraved at its front. Their vehicle of escape, she assumed. Now, to see how daring of an escape this would be. Never in her life had Riaz ever felt as humiliated. Their daring escape came in the event of her pretending to be unconscious, flopped over on the horseback while the Templar handled all the talking. One thing she learned was that he was concerningly adept at lying and making things up on the spot that she was starting to believe he really did catch her trying to run away, knocking her out in the process. She overheard their conversation as if it were a well-rehearsed play, where Zero played the cunning lead role and Riaz herself was the helpless victim. She was a feisty one, Zero chuckled, recounting their fictional struggle to the policemen who were thankfully none the wiser. Are all your men all right? See, Messer, some of my men are unconscious. That Strega cast a spell on them, one of the policemen stated vehemently, complete with an accusatory finger pointing at her. The monastery. Is she the one responsible? Zero's act intensified as he shot a cold glare in Riaz's direction, a glare that she couldn't see but could well imagine. I suppose we'll see, he replied, his tone laden with menace. Were there any survivors, Capitan? None so far, Messer, the police officer reported, his voice heavy with unease. Apart from those that happened to be outside the monastery. It doesn't seem likely. Happened. Zero paused for a moment, but the rogue Templar masterfully seized the opportunity to ease their suspicions. Well, let us worry about that one, that's what us knights are here for. You best bring your men the help they need, and I hope you won't mind me borrowing your ride, will you? Not at all, the police adjusted his black cap. The sooner you get rid of her, the better. Many thanks for making my work easier, Capitan, Zero responded with a facade of gratitude. Much obliged, Messer Templar. The police nodded with a curtsy, an expression of relief mixed with worry fell over him as he wondered about the fate of his men. Before heading back into the house, he didn't forget to spit at the dirt as he glared at the crimson locks of the caught demoness. As they departed from the scene, Zero skillfully maneuvered through the narrow streets of Florence. Riaz couldn't help but marvel at the contrast between the beautiful city and the treacherous reality she faced. She had never been a fan of playing the damsel in distress, but she understood the necessity of their charade. Glancing over at her with a mischievous glint in his eyes, Zero whispered under his breath, "You should consider yourself lucky, you know." Riaz, still pretending to be unconscious, shifted slightly, her curiosity piqued. She couldn't help but mutter, "And why is that?" "Because you're getting a free tour of Florence, courtesy of yours truly," Zero replied with a smirk. Riaz stifled a chuckle, realizing that, despite the circumstances, there was a certain charm to their peculiar partnership. The ancient city of Florence, with its rich history and stunning architecture, served as the backdrop to this unlikely alliance. Little did anyone suspect that beneath the veneer of their act lay a devil and a rogue Templar, bound by circumstance and the secrets they carried. As they rode through the cobbled streets, the two fugitives continued their journey into the unknown, knowing that their shared destiny was far from predictable. Hours stretched into the distance as the horse carried them away from Florence, heading westward toward Pisa. Fortunately, she was no longer treated like a sack of flour and was allowed to sit more comfortably in the saddle. The destination offered a glimmer of hope. Zero had mentioned knowing someone in Pisa who could help, and he threw in a comment about the exceptional wine in the city. Riaz couldn't complain as long as their contact wasn't affiliated with the Inquisition. They could have easily covered the distance in half an hour by train, but that was not an option. The alarm had been raised in Florence, and the city had become a hotbed of exorcists and ambitious, some bloodthirsty, knights from various orders, all eager to prove themselves or spill demonic blood. And with their earlier encounter with the search party, it was only a matter of time before they realized this Templar never reported back to the region's chapter house. As the golden rays of the rising sun painted the horizon, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves echoed through the picturesque Tuscany region. They moved swiftly through winding trails, surrounded by the vibrant beauty of the Italian countryside. The rolling green hills, the refreshing scent of the air, and the sense of freedom that came with riding a magnificent beast were all there, creating a picturesque setting. It would have been perfect if her stomach wasn't trying to rip itself apart. Occasionally, a pained groan escaped her lips, and her grip on the Templar tightened whenever the horse encountered a rocky patch or a pothole. She felt every jolt, her body reacting with a symphony of discomfort, while her shoulder wound acted as a relentless conductor of agony. The Templar glanced back to see Ria's Gremory clinging to his back with her pale arms, wincing every now and then, each breath heaving with the effort. He could sense her struggle and the pain she was enduring. "You holding up all right back there?" "NNH, I've been better," she wheezed in response, her hand instinctively clutching her chest as she endured another bout of coughing. Her fever had escalated, a troubling sign of her body's fight for survival. Her consciousness swayed like a fragile boat on a stormy sea, tempting her to surrender to slumber. But her pride would not allow it. He had shouldered the burden of their journey thus far, and the least she could do was to ride alongside him until he decided it was time to rest. "I'd fetch you some meds, but you know why I can't." "I know," Riaz replied with a weary nod. She understood the risks involved in leaving her behind to retrieve medicine. Every local pharmacy was on high alert, with exorcists stationed nearby, ready to respond to any supernatural threat. Lingering in the city longer would have exposed her to danger and the clutches of the church, or worse. "Don't die on me," he said, only half jokingly. "I wouldn't dream of it," she managed, forcing a chuckle in spite of her hazy mind. "Hey, why don't you tell me more about your Templar business? I regaled you with my tale enough for one day. Let's listen to yours instead." A noble-turned-pauper tends to have a lot of stories to share, I've found. "What do you want to know?" Riaz replied. "Or rather, what don't you know already?" "How can anyone answer that kind of question?" he asked back. "In that case," she breathed, completely silent for several seconds, before continuing. "Tell me what you know instead." As he glanced back at her, the mysterious devil exuded a captivating air. Despite the circumstances, she showed courage and strength. Riaz, the fugitive devil who had fled both hell and earth, was a name he had only heard stories about. Yet, inexplicably, he felt a peculiar connection with her, as if they were kindred spirits. He had a sense that following her would lead to the grandest of adventures, perhaps even his own demise. But, as Peter Pan had taught him, death itself could be the grandest adventure of all. Though, he'd rather save that one for the last. "Well," he began, assembling his thoughts then words. "Let's see. I know you're a fugitive in both hell and earth. Likely heaven too. Don't know how or why it happened though. We don't get hell's news broadcasted around here. It's a long story." He sensed her hesitancy, but pressed on. "Longer than the road." "Point taken." Riaz exhaled deeply, grunting softly as she clutched her stomach. To put it simply, she began to explain, the underworld consists of two principal factions. The old Satan faction clings to tradition and archaic practices like ancient relics. They're the devils who extend themselves to this world with the intent to abduct individuals to serve as their thralls. I'm certain you've crossed swords with them on numerous occasions, giving rise to your Reaper reputation. I'm guessing you're aligned with the other faction. The new Satans, indeed, Riaz affirmed. We're the new blood, determined to seek compromise with our former adversaries. Unfortunately, our ideals are easily stigmatized as treachery and an affront to our heritage, almost as if it were orchestrated from the start. Zero contemplated her words while the horse navigated the uneven terrain, effortlessly surmounting the occasional obstacle. "Planned, you think?" he probed. "Who can say?" Riaz mused, bemused. "But the execution is so precise that it's difficult to believe it wasn't premeditated. However, I must acknowledge that it was foreseeable. My brother was campaigning to become a Satan. Things were progressing splendidly, you see. He possessed a magnetic charm, a war hero of the brothers' wars, and the right connections to be a Satan." "What's your brother like?" "Just like you. Same hair but a man." "Yes, actually," Riaz chuckled. "He's a bit taller." "Just a bit." "Yes," Riaz confirmed, her tone growing warmer as she delved further. "The turning point arrived when my brother proposed the idea of renewing the non-aggression pact with the other major factions. The public perceived my brother's proposal as a threat to the established order, a sign of weakness, or even betrayal to our ancestors' legacy. The uproar was swift, but our opposition even swifter. It was clear that our ideals did not align with the majority." Zero listened intently as Riaz continued to unravel her story, her words painting a vivid picture of intrigue and family dynamics. "Sounds like your brother had quite the vision," Zero remarked, his mind piecing together the puzzle of her history. "But shaking up the status quo in a world built on tradition can often be met with resistance, especially when it involves reconciling with former enemies." Riaz nodded, a mix of nostalgia and sadness in her voice. "Indeed, he did. He believed that change was necessary for the betterment of our kind. It's ironic how the very idea that was meant to unite our people became the catalyst for a tragic schism. It was a call for peace, but it felt like a declaration of war to them. Zero continued to listen intently, his curiosity piqued. And how did this unfold? What happened next? Chaos, Riaz replied with a hint of bitterness. The old Satan faction swiftly seized upon the unrest, using it as an opportunity to discredit my brother and his supporters. Accusations of treachery and conspiracies filled the air. It wasn't long before the situation escalated to violence. Miscalculation. Came out too soon. Partially, Riaz gritted her teeth. Most of it was due to the limited time window and urgency. It was my brother's last speech before the new Satans would be elected. I see. Riaz exhaled. The air was fresh. She only wished her body was just as fresh. She hadn't bathed in 4 days now, and although there were other significantly more pressing matters for her to worry about, a lady like her could not find it in her to disregard her hygiene. And then, she cleared her throat. Well, it went south from then on. We lost faith and support from our allies as they believed the underworld wasn't ready for that big of a change, and, as you told me before, preventing change is what those in control desire in the first place. Zero frowned beneath his hood, imagining the turmoil that ensued. So, it became a full-blown conflict, I assume. Yes, Riaz affirmed. A war between the old Satan faction and the new Satans fought over ideology and power. But instead on the battlefield, they did it in conference rooms, in front of the pillars. It didn't matter how powerful my brother is when the pen is mightier than the sword. Zero considered the complicated web of politics and family dynamics she described. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. It was, she agreed, her voice heavy with regret. The final straw came when an attempt was made on my brother's life. A powerful faction within the old Satan group wanted to ensure he couldn't pursue his vision any longer. He survived, but the incident revealed the lengths some were willing to go to maintain the status quo. And that's when you decided to flee, Zero surmised. Riaz nodded, her expression tense. With the mounting threats and growing tensions, my brother and I realized that staying in the underworld would only lead to further strife and bloodshed. We decided to escape, hoping to find a place where we could build a new life and work towards our goals without endangering our family or the entire faction. The Templar pondered her story, reflecting on the complexity of the devil world he had never fully comprehended. So, you became fugitives, hunted by your own kind and constantly on the run. Yes, Riaz confirmed. But I believe in my brother's vision. I'll do whatever it takes to see it realized, even if it means standing against both the old Satan faction and the human world's prejudice against devils. Is it lost, then? He prodded at last. Your cause. She smirked at that. No, it will take a considerable amount of time and effort for us to rebuild our following, and the old Satan can only keep up their harmless facade for so long before the public realize they're living under the rules of a dictator, not a leader. You sound like you're going to start a revolution, Signorina. If it must come to it. We devils do acknowledge strength over charm after all. We're a rather barbaric nation, to be honest, and that's not to mention the demons, she giggled. Though I don't fear their rule will ever escalate into a war between the major factions, I do worry about other factions' disposition towards the underworld. We haven't been in a good light since, well, the start of everything. Couldn't be that bad. You don't know those people. That assumption upset her, he noticed. Therefore he swiftly moved to another topic. So how did you get here anyway? And why? I told you I'm here to look for my servant, for lack of better word. Right now we need all the able hands we can get. And he's important to me. Oh, your boyfriend. A brother, rather, Riaz clutched her chest. Right. You didn't answer how you got here and how you knew he'd be here. Oh, through a magic circle. I know he'd be here because of the history he had with the Roman Catholics. He's never yet able to burn down that bridge. And now that we're crippled, he perceived it was his opportunity to abandon my side and pursue his own story, I suppose. Sounds to me he has all the right to do so, he said bluntly. I don't really get it with devils and their servants. Sounds demeaning, don't you think? We weren't the one that came up with that word either, Riaz defended. Like I said, back when the evil pieces were created, the underworld wasn't ready to welcome humans as equals, even if we do rely on them for some parts. And still you used it despite all of that. Riaz pouted. I don't need to deal with this playground jibes. To which he chuckled. Midas space. It's rather easy to kick a woman when she's down. Sadist, she quipped. Guilty as charged, he laughed. So what's your plan going forward, Signorina? Let's say you find the guy, won't resist and tag along with you. Frankly, I thought of staying here. In your world, I mean. There are other supernaturals out there, some that haven't completely shut their doors to our kind. You're gonna play diplomat. Attempt, at the very least. That's what I studied. Well, theory can only get you so far, but I guess we'll see soon enough. What do you mean? My contact over at Pisa, he mentioned, she's a damper nobility. Former nobility. Valerie Teeps, heard of her. Within a room that felt plucked from a bygone era of magic, a young sorceress held her ethereal court. The towering shelves, crammed with dusty tomes and mystical grimoires, basked in the soft, flickering embrace of countless hovering candles. The ancient parchments exuded a fragrant blend of knowledge and smoldering incense, as though the very air itself was ensnared in a spell of wonder. Amidst this arcane sanctuary, the sorceress stood with her short, resplendent purple hair adorned by an array of ribbons, a vibrant contrast to the sinister surroundings. Her ensemble was an elegant and wickedly enchanting purple Gothic Lolita masterpiece, replete with lace, frills, and ribbons that danced like mischievous spirits amidst the shadows. Surrounded by ancient texts, bizarre contraptions, various colored vials, and a brewing cauldron. Her vivid eyes, bearing the weight of untold arcane secrets, shimmered with otherworldly energy as she fervently delved into her incantations. Her delicate fingers traced invisible sigils and conjured forth luminous bursts of magic that coiled and weaved like ethereal serpents, their violet hues mingling with the velvety darkness. She remained the maestro of her mystical orchestra, lost in the rhapsody of her own making, unaware of the shadow that lurked within her chamber. His mission was no trivial matter but straightforward, the capture of the wayward sorceress, Walburga, who was confirmed to possess the coveted Incinerate Anthem. A Longinus imbued with the power to summon and manipulate devastating purple holy fire, anathema to creatures of darkness. A Longinus that would better serve the Templar order, rather than remaining ensnared in the ambitions of an audacious sorceress. With eyes like molten amber, his breath dampened by his cloth mask, he watched every subtle gesture of Walburga while he sauntered almost casually through the room, the window behind him remaining open. The only contrast to the darkness being the vibrant red cross emblazoned on his chest. An irony, present in the childish appellation he had chosen at the tender age of 10, now manifested in his adult persona, Zero, a name symbolic of the void he embodied. Known for leaving naught but an empty echo of his presence, for concealing his arcane aura entirely, an ethereal phantom amidst the supernatural realms that left nothing but silence in his wake. And now, to silence her. In an instant, Zero's gloved hand clamped around Walburga's wrist and her neck like a vice, and his latent nullifying ability immediately halting her futile attempts to summon her arcane incantations. The Incinerate Anthem unleashed its holy fire, pulsating with ethereal purple flames. Yet it remained impotent, leaving not even a scorch mark at his sanctified Templar outfit. Nice try. Zero's voice held a note of his trademark dry humor as he addressed the powerless sorceress. But I happen to be a man of faith. Well, not as devout as I probably should, but you get the idea. Her spells nulled, her Longinus failing to work, he was not a creature of hell. He was, her eyes widened in recognition, the truth dawning upon her. Why he silenced her with a gloved hand over her lips. SHH. Quiet, Strega. Your fellow witches are sleeping. Powerless and vulnerable without her spells, she felt her heart race with dread as Zero forcibly brought her towards the bubbling cauldron that simmered ominously, its green concoction laden with latent enchantments. Rise from Livin' Lucifer. Culipoth. Any of these ring any bells? Zero's tone remained deceptively casual, though beneath his demeanor, a storm of fear and terror washed over Walburga. I'll let you talk now, but scream, and you'll be drinking this soup of yours. Yes, I know them. I can help you. Walburga's voice quivered with desperation as she hastily sputtered out the truth, every word imbued with the raw urgency of her dire predicament. Well, go on. Risvam. Promised power, wealth, and an unending lust for magic. I couldn't resist, she began, her tone pleading. He promised us, me and my Hexenact coven, the world in exchange for our allegiance. A deal with the devil, Classic. What's your end of the bargain? Walburga's gaze briefly flitted to the simmering pot, the heat radiating against her face, before she mustered the courage to reply, I am tasked with discovering methods to extract sacred gears. Our primary pursuit revolves around acquiring sacred gears and siphoning their power. Zero's eyes narrowed, a glint of dangerous intent in their depths, enough to make her feel threatened. It was for his own sinister purposes, I swear. I can tell you everything, every detail, every operation, everything he's done. Just don't kill me. What do you know about Rysom's ultimate goal? Zero inquired, his voice lilting with his usual disarming carefreeness. I don't know everything, she stammered, her fear giving way to unfiltered truth. But he's searching for something that he believes will reshape the world. He's been conducting experiments, dark rituals, and using the power of the sacred gears to achieve his objectives. I swear, that's all I know. He considered for a moment, letting the sorceress feel the stinging heat and the bubbling of the hot green goop. Oh, it just switched color to red. Show me how this extraction is done. His expressive eyes telling his distaste, Zero brought her face closer to the bubbling cauldron, the searing heat of the pot almost kissing her neck. Okay. The extraction, right. I'll explain it to you. It's getting quite hot, wouldn't you agree? Zero chuckled, a hint of appreciation for her dark humor as he lifted her face slightly off the boiling content. For you, yeah, I'd imagine as much. Still gripped by Zero's firm hold, she hesitantly revealed the dreadful process. With a quivering hand, she pointed to a set of ominous-looking vials nearby. You see those vials? Those are the key. Sacred gears are intrinsically tied to the soul, and extracting them is a matter of severing that connection. She continued, her voice low and filled with apprehension. We use a unique alchemical solution, one that resonates with the essence of the sacred gear itself. When injected into the subject, it triggers a reaction, forcibly separating the sacred gear from its host soul. The moment it's ripped away, the soul is irrevocably destroyed. Living? That's optional, as long as the body is fresh enough. Sacred gears take time before detaching itself from their host soul, which also takes its own time before detaching itself from its vessel. For how long? About a day, unless the soul is trapped in the body or it's reaped early by a reaper. She swallowed her saliva, though her mouth felt drier than the desert. You're not going to. And my arcane research, right? I can be a valuable asset to your order, esteemed Templar. I'm thinking. Walburga sealed her lips instantly. She watched his face, the only discernible being his eyes and a bit of skin not hidden by his hood or his dark cloth mask. There was an expression clouding his hidden features, but she couldn't tell what it was. It was fascination, interest, with a pinch of genuine amazement. And once it's extracted, how do you claim it as your own? Rituals, I'm guessing. And, no need for a ritual, Walburga explained, her voice tinged with dread. Once severed, it's a matter of containment. It's stored within a phylactery, a vessel created for this purpose. She gestured to some jars. They looked macabre, but still, a jar to him. This phylactery is then prepared for a new owner, typically through a rigorous process of purification and attunement. Zero's intrigue deepened, and he prodded further, and how does it end up in the hands of the chosen successor? She swallowed hard, her dread growing palpable. The power within the phylactery can be claimed by a new owner willingly or forced upon them. Or, the sacred gear can be infused to an object, often a specially crafted amulet or talisman. Once the object is prepared, it becomes a conduit for the sacred gear's abilities, allowing the new owner to wield its formidable power, but hardly at its zenith. The true power comes from the willingness of the extracted sacred gear to obey its new master. His own morbid curiosity led him to press further. Can it be claimed without using a talisman or fancy relics? While it's still in the phylactery, Walburga hesitated, but the fear in her eyes made her answer clear. Why, yes, it can. But it's a perilous endeavor, for you see, without the buffer of a talisman, the sacred gear might resist the new host, damaging their soul, perhaps even destroying it. It's a high-stakes gamble, and the risk is that the sacred gear, in its refusal, may inflict severe damage to the host's very soul. Few are willing to take this gamble, for the price is often their own sanity or, worse, their life. She glanced at the ominous vials once more, her eyes reflecting the horrors she had witnessed in this chamber of arcane secrets. Zero's eyes boring to Walburga's as he inquired further, who else knows about this? Apart from you. Only me and my journal, she confessed with a trembling voice. The secrets are safely hidden away within its pages. Her gaze shifted towards a dusty tome on a nearby shelf, the repository of her dark knowledge, a solitary witness to her sinister dealings. Noting the book, Zero then continued his interrogation. And the instructions within your journal, are they explicit enough for a lower-tier magician to utilize them? Walburga nodded, her voice growing weaker. Yes. It's detailed enough for someone with modest magical abilities to follow. That's why Rysvam was so keen on keeping it in his grasp. Her admission revealed the inherent danger in the knowledge she had guarded, and why this knowledge must never see the light. His own order or the world. I see. Zero nodded with an eerie calmness, his voice devoid of emotion. Thank you for your cooperation. Oh, you're welcome, Reaper. A faint, trembling smile touched Walburga's lips, his relief coursed through her. She felt like she had narrowly escaped the clutches of death. You're surprisingly well-humored, and you're surprisingly optimistic. Before she could fully grasp his words, with a well-practiced maneuver, Zero's gloved hand swiftly guided her head inside the cauldron. Her hands scrambled, attempting to claw at his face, though her struggle didn't even last 5 seconds, as her muffled scream silenced in the unforgiving, alchemical depths. Don't fear the Reaper, Rasen Fleur. He likes new toys. Our world is tainted by these unnatural ilk, filth that tarnishes the world. We embrace the divine responsibility of collecting their powers, to purify them and ensure they are used for the greater good. For we are guided by the Father of Understanding. They do not. In the stillness of the night, Zero and Rias continued their journey towards Pisa, the rhythmic cadence of their horses' hooves serving as the metronome of time. Rias, wrapped in sleep, clung to Zero, the remnants of her past trials manifesting as nagging injuries. Years had come and gone since that memorable showdown with the unfortunate witch, yet the memory clung to Zero's mind as tenacious as a bad habit. Ah, the good old days, he mused with a wry smirk, concealed behind his dark cloth mask. Fireworks to die for, really. After briefly comparing that night's firework to the recent one in Florence, a hint of wry amusement tugged at his concealed lips as he recalled the mixed reactions that had followed his actions. He got flack from the church, especially from the stern Griselda. They hadn't exactly thrown a party to celebrate his decision to expedite Walburga's reckoning. They seemed to prefer long, drawn-out trials, but Zero was never a man for bureaucracy. On the flip side, the Templar Order had given him a standing ovation for his pragmatic approach. Their objectives had been met, and Hexenact had crumbled without its leader, its wayward members promptly hunted and dismembered by the relentless Night Orders. Wahlberg's nefarious research had met the same fiery end as its creator. The twisted sorceress mysteriously dissolved into the very magical stew she had been brewing, and the sinister secrets of sacred gear extractions were snuffed out, with the exception of the one that now nestled within his head. Who would have thought that enduring Greisl's tedious lessons would pay off one day? Zero continued to steer the horse through the Inkai darkness of the mountain range, the Arno River reflecting the early moonlight, the searing pain he'd endured that night resurfacing with perfect clarity. How could he forget it? It was like receiving a thrilling new toy, one neatly concealed without having to clutter up his belt. He hummed a certain melody, Beethoven's Lacrimosa, one that Irina liked to play in the organs the most during her visit because it sounded hauntingly cool, and, in idle amusement, conjured ethereal purple flames that danced before him, his brown eyes alight with a vivid violet glint. The Incinerate Anthem. Not that he'd had much of a chance to play with it. More firecracker than in Apocalypse. They were quite useful in destroying bodies, though, provided they fulfill the creatures of the dark criteria. But now, as he faced the impending brand of a rogue Templar, his self-imposed restriction that had kept the Longinus under wraps had been lifted. Maybe he never had to hide it in the first place since he got Dulio to cover him and talked out the higher-ups that should be in the now, specifically those angels and their pretty halos, but he couldn't be too careful. Nevertheless, like many of his instruments, Zero was prepared to unleash the full extent of this righteously repossessed arsenal. Sticking around with Rias promised an abundance of opportunities to test his fancy tool of his trade to its fullest extent, and his heart was tippy-tappy dancing from the prospect. As Zero's musing simmered, a groan of pain from Rias cut through the night. Her stirring was accompanied by a sheen of sweat glistening on her forehead. Zero swiftly cast aside the ethereal flames, his focus now fully on her well-being. Principessa, he called softly, concern veiling his otherwise unreadable demeanor. You're awake a bit too early. We're not there yet. She winced, struggling to sit up, and nodded, her voice strained. Yeah, just a little worse for wear. Well, might as well change your bandage then. This is the last one, though. It should do the trick. NGH. All right. Zero's gaze swept the surroundings, and he spotted an old, dilapidated shed in the distance. It wasn't much, but it would have to suffice as their temporary refuge. He had to make sure her injuries didn't worsen anyway. Swooping down, and after guiding their horse to a nearby spot for grazing and rest, he gently helped Rias to her feet. Off you go, he urged, his gloved hand guiding hers. Let's get you patched up and rest for a bit. Rias nodded weakly, her dress shirt drenched in sweat and matted with dirt, her dark brassiere contrasting starkly against the once pristine white fabric. For now, Zero refrained from his usual playful banter, sensing that Rias wasn't well enough to engage. As Zero and Rias made their way into the rundown shed, the lack of light was immediately apparent. Zero, in his usual preparedness, reached for a small case on his belt, extracting a pair of night vision goggles. The shed was plunged into darkness, and he wasn't about to let that hinder their progress. With a flick of a switch, the goggles illuminated the space in a ghostly shade of green. The shed, which must have had some purpose in its prime, now sat as a forgotten relic on the desolate mountain trail. Its walls bore the scars of time and neglect, with peeling paint and splintering wood. Once, it might have housed tools, offered shelter to travelers, or served as a rest stop for weary hikers. Now, it was an isolated refuge for those who dared to venture into the unforgiving wilderness instead of taking the train. The air within was musty and tinged with the scent of decay, a testament to years of abandonment. With the green-tinted world revealed by the night vision goggles, Rias remained nonetheless quiet. She was too weak to comment on Zero's choice of gear, and Zero recognized her state well enough not to press for conversation. The small space within the shed offered a modicum of privacy, a rarity in their world. Zero knelt beside Rias, his expression still tinged with that carefree demeanor, but his eyes held genuine concern. Rias, he began softly, I need to change that bandage. Do you mind if I unbutton your shirt? You know I've seen your form before, Bella. Who? Rias, her voice frail and filled with pain, managed a nod, her trust in Zero evident. She knew that in her new line of work, vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't often afford. It wasn't the first time she had faced peril together, and it wouldn't be the last. With her consent, Zero gently began to unbutton her shirt, his movements delicate and focused on minimizing her discomfort. You do this often, she managed despite her condition. The Templar chuckled softly, his voice a soothing presence in the dimly lit shed. I am a sinful man, he replied, the words laden with a mix of humor and self-awareness. With a practiced touch, Zero unwound the bandages that had concealed Ria's injuries. She winced as he exposed her wounds, the raw pain coursing through her body. Zero's fingers, now ungloved and gentle, navigated the task with precision and care. He examined the extent of the injuries, the faintest lines of concern now completely hidden by his hood, goggles, and mask. Having planned his new journey in haste, he had only limited supplies at hand, and the alcohol he retrieved from his pouch was his last. He soaked a clean cloth in the alcohol, the pungent scent stinging the air, and began the meticulous process of cleaning her wounds. Gently, he applied the alcohol to a clean cloth and began to clean the wounds on her stomach and the back of her shoulder. The disinfectant immediately stung, and Riaz clenched her teeth, her hissing growing more frequent. His movements were steady, proving his years of experience in the field. He worked methodically, ensuring every trace of dirt and infection was eradicated, his care for his patient evident in his every touch, be it his fellow brother Templar or devils. As the process continued, the dimly lit shed was filled with a tense atmosphere, the only sounds the occasional hiss of pain and the soft rustling of their movements. Cold sweat now pouring her features, Riaz decided she couldn't bear the pain just by keeping silent. How much further? Zero glanced at his wristwatch. We should be there in 7 hours. He chuckled softly, trying to offer some reassurance. No, Bella, 7 in the evening. Just an hour's ride. Oh, Riaz managed a relieved sigh, and the knowledge that their destination was so close offered her a glimmer of hope. But a distinct howl sliced through the night. The horse tethered outside the shed whinnied in discomfort, a reaction to the eerie sound that had suddenly filled the air. Zero's attention sharpened with a knowing glint in his eyes. The howl had been distinct, far from that of an ordinary wolf. It carried an air of primal ferocity and darkness, a sound that only one thing could produce, a werewolf. Wolf, Riaz murmured weakly, her voice laden with concern. Nah, he replied with a touch of excitement. It's our ticket into town. The arrival of a werewolf in these desolate mountains was a twist he hadn't expected, but it promised an unexpected thrill, and that was something he could never resist. Besides, the heads of such creatures fetched quite the pretty penny, and in his line of penniless work, one learned to seize opportunities when they arose. Stay here, he instructed firmly, his night vision goggles still perched on his face. Riaz gave out a chuckle. I'll do my best. Be careful. With a grin hidden behind his mask, Zero replied, Careful's my middle name. Next to a slew of others. Ciao. And with that, the Reaper Templar ventured into the darkness outside, leaving Riaz to wait in the rickety shed, the wounds of both body and uncertainty gnawing at her. Break. With a makeshift gray furred sack containing a drained and decapitated werewolf head ominously dangling from the horse's saddle, Zero and Riaz reached Pisa, their destination looming ahead. As they approached the city gates, Zero dismounted and guided the horse toward a station guard. In a silent exchange of understanding, the Templar handed the sack containing the severed werewolf head to one of the guards who held the highest rank at this checkpoint. The head was proof of his skills as a member of the Night Order, and it served as a subtle bribe to discourage the guards from asking too many questions. Zero offered a knowing wink, and the guard captain nodded in silent understanding. This unsavory gift was enough to dissuade further inquiries about the wounded woman now carried on Zero's back. Bastarda nearly got her, Zero explained to the guard captain, emphasizing the threat of the werewolf, intending to use it as a convenient scapegoat to its maximum capacity. I need to conclude my order's business here. See to it that my arrival doesn't make too much noise, I Capitano. You and your men's discretion is vital to my task in this sweet town. See, Messer Templar, the guard captain acknowledged, taking the sack without inspecting its grisly contents too closely. Good man, do you own a serrata? With that casual parting, Zero left the guards behind and navigated the streets of Pisa, Riaz quietly breathing, sleeping on his back. He moved through the city like a shadow, veiled by the dark cloak of the night, passing Riaz off as a lady who had overindulged in Pisa's well-known winery. Zero's steps were light, and his presence almost imperceptible as he made his way to a hidden location, a secret hideout where he could access his connection with a dormant ally. This underground sanctuary was concealed beneath the bustling city of Pisa, hidden from the eyes of the world. Zero moved through the labyrinthine passageways with practiced ease, tapping into his memory for the hidden entrances that would grant him easier access. Well, of course he remembered this place. This was where Dulio used to take him during his younger years. Once inside, Zero gently laid Riaz down on a makeshift bed to ensure her comfort. He then activated a concealed panel in the sandy wall, revealing a hidden communication device. With a few skilled movements, he initiated contact with his underground ally. Hey, yeah. This is Enzo. I'm in a bit of a pickle and I left my wallet at home. Zero spoke into the device, his words laced with a playful tone. The seconds ticked by, and as he waited, he took a deep breath. Memories flooded back, and he couldn't help but take in the sights, sounds, and smells of the place he had spent countless hours in as he went on to relit the candles. This remote and small hideout was once used as a base during his younger years. A dimly lit and compact space, hidden away beneath the bustling city of Pisa. Its walls were made of rough-hewn stone, and they bore the scars of countless years of use. The flickering light of a few strategically placed candles cast dancing shadows on the stone surfaces. Along the walls, there were shelves that held various items, a mix of trinkets, books, and tools, all relics from Zero's past. The silence within the hideout was welcome, save for the occasional drip of water from a hidden source. The faint echo of footsteps and whispers from the city above quieted down through the stone, a reminder of the world beyond. A musty scent, the result of years of being sealed beneath the ground. It was a scent that Zero associated with his childhood, a comforting reminder of the years he had spent learning the ways of the world. The makeshift bed for Riaz was a simple cot, its wooden frame worn smooth from use. A threadbare blanket covered it, offering some semblance of comfort. The walls, cool to the touch, radiated the history of the hideout, their rough texture a tactile reminder of the passage of time. A place where Zero had spent many hours studying and learning. The memories of shared meals and conversations with Dulio lingered, leaving a bittersweet taste in his mouth as he looked around. In this place, Zero had forged a bond with his mentor and had learned the skills that would shape his future as a Templar. The hideout was more than just a physical space. It held the essence of his youth and the foundation of his experiences. Now, it served as a sanctuary for Rias, a place of refuge in a world fraught with danger for her kind, and now, perhaps him specifically as well. As Zero was taking in the atmosphere of the hideout and reacquainting himself with the memories of his youth, the intercom suddenly sparked to life with a familiar voice. "Enzo, is that you? Or your place is haunted?" He quickly approached the panel, pulling down his cloth mask to reveal his face. He absently licked the thin, new scar on his lips he had earned from his recent tussle with the female werewolf. "Boo," he started with a chuckle. "Good to know you're not Ashes, V. And good to hear you haven't changed, and are still in one piece." Her chuckles filtered through the intercom, and there was a sense of relief in her tone. "Sit tight, my men will be there soon." Zero nodded absently even though she couldn't see it. "Oh, I have an extra guest." "Oh, Dulio's there with you." "No, a devil," Zero bluntly stated, a hint of curiosity in his voice. The situation had taken an unexpected turn, and he was eager to hear how she would react. After a significant pause, her voice held a note of wariness as she responded, "Who is it?" "Rias, Remery clan." "She's..." He took a glance at her. "Yep, still writhing in pain. Pretty banged up." "Heard of her." "Of course, I'll be right there." Her swift acknowledgement indicated that she understood the gravity of the situation. Valerie Teeps was not a typical ally, not even close to being an ally of the Order. But her skills and connections had proven invaluable in the past. And tonight, it seemed that sparing her was indeed the right call. Vampires didn't normally act on their own, after all. Yesterday's enemies and all that jazz. Seated on a creaky chair that protested under his weight, Zero stretched out his legs and began to softly whistle the tune of Lacrimosa. He couldn't help but recall Irina's dramatic performances on the organ, a fond memory that had been etched in his mind from countless renditions, or way too many. His eyes sparkled with a violet glint as he harnessed the power of his reaped Longinus, its tiny purple flames dancing in the confined space of the hideout, casting a surreal glow that added an otherworldly ambience to the surroundings. The flickering flames were a silent testament to the newfound power he wielded, and as he watched them twirl and spin, he couldn't help but wonder about the path ahead. With Riaz's safety and his ticket to the thrill rides in the underworld hanging in the balance and his own complicated connections in the supernatural world, the night was far from over. But the journey so far had been anything but ordinary, a perfect blend of thrill and danger that quickened his pulse. It was like savoring a perfectly seasoned dish, a taste of the unexpected, with a dash of danger and a pinch of intrigue. A culinary masterpiece in the making. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.